Hello and welcome to the final Atacs podcast of 2018. This is our quote-unquote Game of the Year podcast where we are going to talk about our favorite games of the year. I am your host, Flex. Joining me are Will from Greenville, North Carolina. How's it going, Will?
Pretty good. Currently located in State College, Pennsylvania.
What?
But we'll be back in Greenville tomorrow.
What? Do they have video games there?
I made sure they did.
Okay. You brought them with you.
Yeah.
All right. Introduce video games to the boonies of the State College.
I'll just pull them from the cloud, the mysterious cloud.
Oh, that's impressive. Technology, folks.
Right.
Also joining us is Nate from Clayton, North Carolina.
Hello.
Tell us about the state of video games in Clayton, North Carolina.
It's basically been a lot of Smash Bros.
Okay.
That's
forecast,
where I'm at right now.
Pull up the video game forecast for Clayton. It's just Smash Bros for days.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Smash Bros warning.
I will stay away. I'm just kidding. I was in Clayton playing Smash Bros.
You were.
And finally, we have Ryan from New York. How's it going, Ryan?
It's going well. How are you guys?
Tell us the fate of your Magic the Gathering game.
It's all in the heart of the cards right now.
As is life.
I started a game on MTG Arena, the traditional draft where you actually do play a best of three, and got into a grindy Dimir versus Golgari match right before we started this podcast. So I may be finishing my third game while we were casting.
Be sure to let us know what the result is.
This is very important updates. We need
turn by turn,
especially if he decks himself.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we are changing up our format this year. We did Game of the Year podcasts the previous 2 years for Atacs, and the goal those years was to get an ordered top 10 list of our favorite games, and we achieved that ordering by yelling at each other and calling each other names. That's an exaggeration, but we did debate and try and get these, through debate, establish an order. So this year, we're tossing out the debating. We're getting rid of that. Mm-hmm. All four of us have made a top 10 list of our favorite games, and we will read those lists at the end of this. But we basically looked at those lists and said, hey, what games appeared on our lists? What are the 10 that stand out the most from those lists? Basically averages those lists together. So we have already created a list of our, basically, quote unquote, our top 10 games of the year. It's maybe not a perfect method, but it got us 10 games that we'd like to talk about. And this is basically our look back of the year and saying, hey, these 10 games stood out to us. We like these games a lot. I think it's fair to say that broadly speaking for the Atacs crew, these were kind of the 10 games that defined our year in a way. All of us have picks that are not on this list, and we'll get to shout those out at the end when we read our own personal list. So this is kind of our way to, in a somewhat timely fashion, just reminisce on the year in games. So with that, we're just going to start reading down the games in this list, and this is roughly ordered. We'll count down 10 to 1, but don't put too much stock in the ordering. It's not that big of a deal. But we are going to kick it off with, speaking of Smash Brothers.
Yes.
The first game we're going to talk about is, I guess we can go ahead and say things like this. This is Nate's favorite game of the year.
Yes, it is.
Super Smash Brothers Ultimate. So I think it's only appropriate to have Nate start talking about this game and why you liked it so much and why it stood out in 2018.
Yeah, so Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, the newest entry in the franchise, comes out for the Nintendo Switch just a few weeks ago. And I think it is overall an excellent package. It delivers on all the things I want from a Smash Brothers game, which is very high highly detailed fighters that play very differently and very colorful, fun stages and items and taunts, and just pretty much everything in those games has so much personality and flavor to it that is also like a big celebration of video games. And, Ultimate is more of that than even the previous ones, with the World of Light and the way the classic modes are done in this. So the single player options are like extremely, extremely about like paying homage to video games, specifically Nintendo's history with video games. And it's just like a really feel good game for me. I love the fighting style of it. And I spent like 3 or 4 hours earlier today playing just online quick play matches, which is not something I typically do in any game.
Yeah. You did do that with Smash 4, if I remember.
Yeah, I did do it for a little while with Smash 4 for the Wii U.
How's your internet connection been online? How's the lagginess?
It's been pretty good, I would say.
Okay.
Probably 1 out of, 15 or 20 matches will have some lag spikes, but the rest are solid.
Gotcha. That's pretty solid. I tried one match. To be fair, it was a 4-player free-for-all.
Yeah, it's always going to be worse with free-for-all.
So I had more players, but it was unplayable.
Yeah, I think all it takes is one person to have a bad connection. So if you have 4 players, then it just like nukes the whole thing.
And the people playing one-on-one are probably more quote-unquote serious, so they may be more likely to have a good connection. I don't know. I don't know if that's a reasonable, rational way to think about it.
I think that's totally legit. Like, I bet as you play 1v1s with the quote-unquote like more serious rule sets, and as you up your ranking and get to like people that are more serious about it, I bet you probably have better connection stability.
Yeah.
That's I think a problem with fighting games in general.
Yeah, that's always a tough thing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if Nintendo is particularly strong in this area, but
no, they're definitely not.
I don't know if they're particularly weak either. So,
but yeah,
this game is basically the most Smash Brothers.
It is the most Smash Brothers.
That's kind of how I view it
in
every way. And to me, the big thing this game does that the previous games didn't do, is like it really ratchets up the fan service stuff in terms of. And I'm not saying that as explicitly a pejorative.
Yeah. It sounds like a bad thing, but
it ratchets up maybe I should just say the nods to other games in the World of Light mode, in the way it like, even in addition to the 70 whatever characters that are in the game, like the World of Light mode makes, through the spirit stuff, makes nods to way more video games than that.
Right.
Way more characters. So like, yes, there's all the everyone is here stuff and whatever, but a lot of that to me is just like, this is just more Smash Brothers. And Smash Brothers has always been two things to me. It's always been a fun party brawler type thing.
Yeah.
And it's always been a celebration of Nintendo. Just the way it brings together Nintendo stuff. And this game kind of branches out to just be more a celebration of video games in general.
Definitely. Yeah.
Because it's got way more third party stuff.
Yeah.
The bummer of that is that I do not like playing the World of Light mode, so I don't really see much of that stuff.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's, people are going to fall one of two ways on World of Light. I think it is the best adventure mode that Smash Brothers has ever had, but for most people, that's probably not a high bar.
Yeah. I mean, there's only been one other Smash Brothers game with an adventure mode.
Yeah. I mean, Melee had an adventure mode. It was just...
Did it?
Yeah. It totally did.
I don't remember that at all.
It's nice that they keep experimenting with it. It is kind of a funny thing.
Yeah. It's completely different from anything else they've done. I won't say I like love World of Light, but I enjoyed it, even though it was, way too long and not paced exactly how I would have paced it. But what I ended up coming down on it was that like it is a fun mode for me, and probably for a lot of people who just want single player Smash Brothers content.
I'm glad it's in there because, like, while I gripe about its length, like someone who's mostly coming, like it is a viable and lengthy way to play Smash Brothers single player.
Yeah, like if you think about the kid who got a Switch for Christmas and Smash Brothers, but didn't like have a bunch of people to play with, and like that's the game you have on your Switch.
Yeah.
Then like World of Light and Classic mode together is just so much you can do.
It's a lot of there's a lot to those modes.
And I don't think they're bad at all. Like I think they're serviceable at worst, and like I think they're I would
call World of Light serviceable. It is like World of Light is just probably hundreds of bot matches. Like that's what it is.
Yeah, it is all CPU matches with just like bizarre rule changes and items and different modifiers applied.
And it's just a lot of that.
And it is a lot of matches.
And
so
I don't think I've ever enjoyed CPU fights in Smash Brothers.
Yeah. I will say, and you know, you can take this with a grain of salt because if you don't like playing single player Smash Brothers, that's fine. But even though it took forever to get through that mode and like I was pretty tired of it about halfway through, I was still and like it's cheesy. Okay, Smash Bros is cheesy, right? Like it's not serious.
Yeah.
But even though it's super cheesy and dumb, like the final stretch of World of Light, I was like way into in kind of a dumb and silly way. But
you embrace the cheese.
It was fun. I liked it, and for whatever it's worth, finishing World of Light was worth it to see that final stretch.
Okay. I will not spend those 30 hours on that mode.
Yeah, I wouldn't suggest you do that, but
yeah, but that's cool that it should be said that you are Smash superfan number one.
That's me.
I wonder for me, like I've enjoyed Smash Bros in the past, and I've enjoyed this game in spots as well. But like even for me as someone who has enjoyed Smash Brothers along the way, this mode did not do anything for me.
Yeah.
I think otherwise in general, I feel like this game feels like a very like to me they could have just put out all the new characters for Smash 4 and like it would feel like the game basically. I know for people super in tune with like the controls changes, like
I can see why you would say that.
Yeah, like I know those controls changes or whatever, others like small tweaks make a difference to people who are super into the scene like you are.
Yeah.
But I think for anyone not jacked all the way in, this game is very much the previous game with a bigger roster.
Yeah, I
think that's kind of my biggest downer with the game.
Sure. Yeah, I do think the engine is much improved, and it may not be something you would feel if you didn't play a lot of 4 and you haven't played a lot of this yet.
Like I totally believe you, the engine's improved, and I cannot tell that on my own at all.
Yeah.
And I played a couple dozen hours of Smash 4. Like it's not like I just played it 2 hours and was done. Like I put time into that game.
Yeah, but it was also years ago, right?
Yeah, it was 4 years ago.
Yeah.
When I last touched it, probably.
So, I mean,
close to that.
Yeah, I think we've said it before when we talked about this game, but like if anybody played like a dozen hours of a Street Fighter game and then 4 years later played the new one, it would be similar, right?
Yeah. But I think even with that, me personally, and this may just be me, but I feel like at this point, being this 5th Smash Brothers game, I want something more than just a fighting engine refinement.
Sure. I think that's fair. I mean,
and I know fighting games like this isn't just Smash Bros. Like fighting games in general are all pretty samey within a franchise. Like it's rare to have very big leaps. So I get that. Like I'm not really ragging on the game that much for that. It was just one of those things that like when I started playing it, I was just I don't actually know that I'm up for more of this.
Yeah. I don't know.
I mean, it does like. I will say, even in spite of all that, like the engine does seem at least as good as any previous game. So, like,
yeah,
this is the most Smash Brothers and probably the most refined Smash Brothers.
Yeah, I definitely think those two things are true. It has a ton of stuff in it It's very refined. All the movement feels great. I like all the little changes they did. And
Apparently, there were 10,000 of them.
there are 10,000 changes. Yeah, one of them was Wii Fit Trainer's face.
What?
But one of the biggest quality of life things is just like all the different rule set options and all the different options in general. So we talked about the single player modes, but even beyond that, you can do all these different types of regular smashes, 8 players, free for all items, stage hazards on and off. There's over 100 stages to pick from. You can do battlefield or final destination forms of any stage. There's like Smash Down, which is where you take turns picking characters off the roster and then they get taken off and you go through the whole roster that way. And Squad Strike, where you pick a team of 3 or 5 and go through your team against another team. And then the online mode has been working for me. I don't know if it necessarily will work forever for me, but like trying to just climb the rankings has been fun, and just seeing how other people are playing the game has been fun, and that it definitely highlights the more I play of just online how like fast and responsive this fighting system is. And like the thing I still love about Smash Brothers is how dynamic it feels to play versus when I don't necessarily understand other fighting games. They feel like more technical, I guess, more combo based, like knowing specific timings and stuff. And I know Smash Bros. Can get to that level. But to me, it feels like the movement options in the game create such a dynamic and free-flowing fighting style that is just really engaging to me.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's my spiel on Smash Bros.
Yeah, and it really does sound like you like this one because you've always liked Smash, and this seems like the best one.
Yeah, definitely.
I just wish you could unlock all the characters from the start.
Fair.
That's my last gripe. Man, it is very well made. The times I've had playing multiplayer of this game have been really fun.
Yeah,
it's the same. It's the same fun I've had with previous Smash Brothers games, but it is still really fun.
Yeah, it is just a fun game. It's always been a fun franchise, like you said, and this just keeps that train rolling and kind of brings it all together in a way that is more than all the previous ones.
Yeah. Well, anything else left to say about Smash Brothers?
It's a good game. I think that's good.
It is a good game.
Let's move on to number 9.
All right. So the next one is also someone's favorite game of the year. Mr. Will really liked Far Loan Sales this year.
Number 9. You guys get that reference? Anyway. So yeah, I do not have as much to say about Far Loan Sales as Nate had to say about Smash Brothers.
I'm pretty sure Nate could talk forever about
it's a very...
Should we talk about Incineroar? Incineroar is pretty cool.
No. Bad Nate.
Go ahead.
So it's very, very it's a very quick play. I think I got through it in maybe a little over somewhere between 2 and 3 hours. It's a very story focused game. It's a side scrolling game where you take control of a contraption, like a large sort of vehicle of some sort. They call it the Akamotive, I think. Something like that.
Oh wow, I didn't even pick up on that.
Yeah, I think that's right. I can double check that. But either way, so I started playing it, and I guess I had seen some screenshots of it, and I had seen that it had been received very, very well. And I was saying to myself, I was like, well, there's no way that this thing is going to be really all that engaging. And I guess it all depends a little bit on where your stimulation threshold is, like whether or not you found the systems that were at play to be interesting. I think the things that I liked the most about it were, one, the kind of atmosphere and environmental detail There are these sort of landscapes that you're sort of traveling through, and the camera kind of pans out and pans in as you sort of move through these environments. And the soundtrack, to me, really fits with kind of what's happening. There are a few times where, pressure gets a little bit more intense as you're trying to travel. Maybe because there's like a volcano erupting in the background, or it's a very, very bad hailstorm or something like that. So there are a couple times where the music will rise to fit the occasion. But to me, the cool thing about this is that it felt like a survival game that didn't have like meters and stuff.
Nice.
A lot of times when you think about survival games, it's like you've got your thirst meter and your hunger meter, and you're trying to like make clothes and stuff like that. And in this one, you've just got this locomotive vehicle, and you're just trying to move to the right. That's the only thing. But you're the only person that you ever see. And the other thing that's neat about it is that anything that you find, you can use as fuel for this vehicle. So you'll find stacks of books or explosive barrels or giant teddy bears or anything.
Yeah, I really like that. I played through the game as well, and I really like the idea of just throwing whatever junk you find into this engine. Just like, no, we gotta
keep moving.
Keep going.
How does that look when you do it? I just picture like some Half-Life physics or Oblivion physics where you're like manipulating this stuff and stuffing it into an engine. I'm sure that's not the
you
case.
just throw it in this big container.
Yeah, it's more straightforward than that. There's basically this platform that you just pick up objects and you just drop it on the platform, and then you push a button, and it like the platform like raises and jams whatever item into this, I don't know, incinerator or whatever mechanism converts it into energy, and you just see this liquid go across like through some tubes.
And then you got fuel. You're fueled up.
My favorite thing was when I didn't even think about this, which I probably should have. But when I put the flammable barrel in the engine, it like blew things up, and then you're like scrambling because everything's on fire. So you go grab the hose and start putting stuff out, and then you get the like electric repair tool and start repairing things. And you're like, oh geez, I just blew this up from the inside.
Yeah, that sounds like a bad idea. Why would you do that?
But it actually generated a lot of fuel. So like, it was a trade-off. It's like, oh man, that actually, because different objects will give you different amounts of fuel.
Right.
So it was a high risk reward one that you got a lot of fuel, but caused some damage.
But the rhythm of it is basically, you fuel up, and then as you're heading forward, you're building up steam. Then you need to release the steam. But when you do so, it shoots out behind you. And so it actually gives you another boost of speed. And then you want to pay attention to this flag that's on the front of your ship or the front of your locomotive, because if the wind's behind you and you raise the sails, you can gain extra speed that way. And if the wind's the opposite way and you have the sails up, it's sort of like an issue, like you're not really getting as much out of it. And so it's not really a lot of different pieces. Of course, you also want to pay attention to whether or not there are other sources of fuel on the ground. At one point, I think you actually get a vacuum.
Yeah, you do get a vacuum.
You can hit a vacuum. It'll just like suck up the different things that you drive over to add to your fuel supply. Mm-hmm. But I found that particular dance, I guess, that particular thing was just engaging enough for me to really feel, I guess, invested in what was happening, engaged. I think I expected it to be not quite as engaging as it ended up being for me. I really dug that piece of it. I think the issues that the game has, the main one for me, which is not even really a big gripe, but I felt like I actually wanted to scavenge everything. I wanted to have everything. And it got to where, the game is pretty forgiving, so that, you can maybe miss one source of fuel or two sources of fuel and kind of be fine. But at one point, I think I had so many different things that I had just picked up, and you've got these hooks that you can hang them on, but still, like, your hooks will fill up too. And so
you only have like 7 hooks, and at some point I had like 15 items in my
and you start tripping over them trying to like get through your ship, and that can be a little bit irritating.
You can get tangled up pretty bad.
There's another thing, and I'm not sure it's really a negative, but it is interesting that everything you run into. So you run into these places where you outfit your ship with something new. So maybe you'll outfit it with, the vacuum that I mentioned, or maybe you'll outfit it with the electrical sort of tool that allows you to repair things. And all of these things that you run into seem perfectly compatible with this ship that you have, which is kind of weird, but also I
a little
guess
contrived, maybe.
Yeah.
but was okay. There's another part of the game where you actually move your ship, and it becomes sort of the central piece for a much larger vehicle, which I
Nice.
thought was a pretty exciting piece. So everything seems to kind of fit together,
Mhm.
except for all your fuel, which you end up tripping over.
What
but
do you know what happens if you just like completely run out of fuel? Like if you just bungle
that's
it?
a good idea.
Yeah,
I
that's
should
a good
reload
question.
it
I mean, the
and
game,
give it a shot.
like I had way more fuel items than I needed the entire game. So like, I feel like you would only run out if you were
Trying
really
to.
dilly-dallying or almost deliberately burning fuel, because
Yeah.
more than enough. But that is a great question. I'm really
Well,
curious if it's just like a game over screen and
yeah,
or
I
if it goes
doubt
back
it,
to
because
point or-
there are hooks that are on the front and the back, and there are some of the puzzles where you actually need to. It's probably still possible to completely run out of fuel, like if you have an incline, but there
I
are
bet.
some times where you can hook up yourself to the front of your ship and then
Yeah,
pull it.
you can pull
Oh,
it. Yeah.
okay.
So
Yeah.
you can actually just pull your ship along. So I bet they just force you to pull it, and it's incredibly slow.
So you'll just have to pull for a long time until you find some more fuel.
Yeah, I bet
Right.
that's what would happen.
Yeah.
But
Which
but
is
even
actually,
so,
I like that. I hope that's how it deals with that, because that's
Yeah, I
kind of
hope there's
great.
not a
Actually.
game over screen. I hope
Yeah.
it's just like, well, I guess you got to get out and pull.
Yep. Which I had to
But,
do sometimes for puzzles.
right.
Sometimes because there's no way to drive the ship backwards unless the wind's blowing backwards. And there was one time where I needed to pull the ship back to align it a little bit to the left, and there was no wind. So I got out and pulled it backwards.
Right. So I guess I just think that this was it set out to do something very I guess very not simple necessarily, but very pointed. It had a very direct experience it was trying to give and I didn't feel like there were a lot of frills, and I felt that it was really good at creating the mood that it wanted to and kind of providing the experience that it was kind of going for. So that was, I guess, what I like so much about it. Some of the other games on the list, and we'll get into talking to them, but sometimes there'd be just extra things that were just kind of thrown in that that I'm not sure. I mean, it's sort of like, well, I've mentioned this a couple times on the podcast, the idea that a lot of times some of the AAA games will try to throw in a little something for everybody, and that kind of makes it perfect for nobody sometimes. So I think that, at least for me, Far Lone Sails really clicked, so it really fit with what I was kind of wanting to get out of that experience, and I felt like I had a really enchanting and fun time with it.
Awesome.
Yeah. I think for me, like, and this is all just very dependent on players. You said for you, the level of like engagement was good. I think for me, I did want, like, I don't know, something more to do in the ship.
Right.
Probably about halfway through the game, I was like, all right, I've done this. I've settled into this routine, and it didn't change much for the rest of the game. And I think I just wanted something more to engage with there.
Right. And I think part of it might be environments, like I think I wanted to see what else the game had to show me, even kind of once I'd nailed down the dance, I guess, or the loop of doing the fueling and everything like that. But
yeah, I did like timing the steam exhaust button for the boost.
Yeah, man. There's some achievement that you get for getting the maximum speed.
Yeah, I saw that.
Nice.
I did like the game thematically, though. I thought it was really neat. I think there's a lot of different things you could read in there if you read into it if you want to.
I think it feels to me like it's saying something about environmental change, but it's definitely not hitting you over the head with it or anything.
Yeah, it leaves a lot of room for your own interpretation, but I think what they've done is interesting in that space, and there are a lot of interesting things you could take from it.
But yeah, so that's Far Lone Sails.
Cool. Yeah, it's a neat little game. I did enjoy my time with it as well. So unless there's nothing else to say on that, we'll move on to the number 7 game on our list.
That would be 8.
Oh yes, number 8. Good. I can count. Yep, there we go.
There it is. Now it's numbered.
Thanks, Ryan. Ryan just put numbers in.
Working those Google Docs skills.
Oh, yeah. Love it. So, yeah, the number 8 game on our list, Take a Trip Under the Sea with Subnautica.
Yeah.
And multiple of us played and liked this game, I believe. I liked it.
So, yeah,
for sure.
Talking about survival mechanics where you have to manage thirst and hunger. And
So I really appreciate that there is, when you start the game, there are multiple options to play.
Yeah.
And I did the basic one. I forget what it's called, but I did the standardish looking option, which you do have to balance food and water and oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a mode. I forget what it's called again, but it takes away those takes out those meters, so you don't have to worry about that stuff, which I think is a really cool idea because part of me almost wishes I had done that mode.
Yeah, that would be kind of nice.
Yeah, I enjoyed it to a point, and sometimes it was like it made for fun stories or scenarios where you're stranded somewhere and you're like, I need food or water, and you scramble something together.
Yeah.
But a lot of times I didn't feel like I was really in danger, and it just felt like busy work.
I think there was one time, I had loaded up maybe I think it was the Cyclops with a bunch of stuff, and I was like slowly puttering off into some like no man's land, and I look up and it's like, you need to drink something. You're like rummaging through the lockers. It's like, did I not pack any water?
Yeah. So that stuff can be fun because it really does, like, you have to be on top of stuff. Like, it's kind of all on you, which is just neat. But yeah, I really enjoyed this game a lot. It kind of surprised me because I've never really liked survival games.
Yeah, same for me. Like, I think there are enough things about Subnautica that it does in a little bit more streamlined or like smart fashion on the survival end that just kept me hooked. Like, I mean, part of it is just knowing, like, yes, this is a game with a narrative that it's going to tell and a limited environment to explore, and then there's an ending, right? So like that already is enough.
Yeah, and it is a big world, and I spent a good amount of time on this game. But yeah, knowing that it is finite and there's a progression and an ending was good for me.
Yeah, that makes it easy for me to get into it to start, because if I look at a survival game that's just like, see how long you can survive, I'm kind of like, well, I don't know.
Yeah.
But then it kept me going because the progression is there and it's very strong and it's very fast.
Yeah.
You are constantly finding out what the next things you can build are, and those could be like really useful suit upgrades or tools or whole vehicles or like big pieces of your base, and like it doesn't hold those back at all. And so like that progression kept me really like moving forward instead of floundering and being like, well, I guess I'm going to collect fish for another 4 hours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it gave you good targets, and I like the way they like would reveal, like you would see in the list of things to make. Like sometimes you would see ahead and be like, whether you got a blueprint for it or just sometimes it felt like it would just uncover things just because you made something else. But it was always cool to look ahead and be like, ooh, I'll be able to make that. Like that'll be great. Like, and then you need to find the stuff for it.
Yeah.
But like those upgrades felt really meaningful. Like I remember the first time I got the little, what was it called? The Sea Glide, the little.
Oh yeah.
And you're like, man, now I can I can actually move. Like
it's basically just like a underwater propeller that you hold on to.
Yeah.
But it lets you move really fast.
Yeah, it's a simple thing, but like the way that it feels exploring that world, like those little things can make a big difference. And a lot of that I think is just from the way the world is constructed, because I think they did a really smart thing of you start in the middle of the map basically, and it's called the quote unquote safe shallows, and it's not very deep and it's not very threatening. And then like as you expand from that center point, things get the terrain goes deeper into the ocean and there end up being more threats. And I think I think the environment plays into the progression as well, because as you're getting, like, each new tool you get kind of allows you to venture further from your home base.
Yeah.
And then you get to see more cool stuff. So like every time you get a new thing, you're like, it's exciting because now you can go somewhere, you can go further.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that keeps going for a long time, and then in the end game, you end up with like this fleet of vehicles and this giant sea base.
Yeah, it's nuts. Like the stuff you can build in that game was some of the coolest parts of it to me, because you're just like, you start out with literally nothing. You have like a knife, and that's it. And by the end of the game, you have like a giant sub and like a mech suit and just like all these
really
gadgets. But it's cool as crap though.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah, it's just, I love the scale of it, and I kept being wowed. Like, this game had a lot of wow moments for me, and that comes from a number of areas, but one of them was just like, wow, I can build what? Like, I have a mech suit? Like, yeah. Because like the game doesn't give any it gives no indication of that kind of stuff early on. Like, it seems like it's very simple kind of survival stuff. So then when it starts ramping up, like, it gets wild.
Yeah.
They do. I mean, Subnautica didn't quite make my list, and it's not because I didn't like it. I actually liked it a lot. I guess maybe we can get into that a little more in a second, but it is interesting. It does feel like they've done something pretty unique in a few ways. Like, you guys were talking about survival games, and I guess just to echo that a little bit, like, I remember my brother and I used to play Minecraft together, and it was kind of cool when they added sort of an end game to it, although, that was never really the point of Minecraft. And so after a certain point, it's kind of fun to be able to explore those worlds and build a bunch of stuff. And, if you don't want to go fight something big and scary, you just go build a bigger house or whatever. It's, those games have a lot of cool stuff in terms of like exploring and building and, managing resources. And, Subnautica did some of that in more of like, a little less of a voxel, like freeform type way. I guess it's like I don't know if it's a Unity or an Unreal game, but they did it in a format I haven't seen before. And they also, go ahead.
I think it's Unity, but it's not a big deal either way. Yeah.
They did it in that kind of more like immersive 3D first person format. And they also, like you said, they added the sort of campaign or the story. And that was super cool, because it always gave you, like you guys were saying, like, it gives you enough direction to kind of point you, and the progression is not just for its own sake. I know when Flex and I tried playing a little bit of Don't Starve together, that game was really challenging, and we played a little bit of it, and I kind of liked, figuring out some of the early survival mechanics, but then, once we started hitting the challenges, I looked ahead a little bit, and it's like, well, this doesn't really have an end game. So other than just playing it indefinitely, I don't know what it's not that people can't enjoy that. Some people love sandbox games, but I find myself like, there's just so much else to do. It helps to have a little bit of like, here's your goalpost, and then you kind of measure it and see if it's reasonable.
I thought it was a good balance of still being a very open game in a lot of ways, but kind of giving you those goalposts and a focus, like something to aim towards. And so, I mean, for me, like, I liked it a lot, and I hope to see more of it. I think they've announced like Subnautica Sub-Zero or something like that. I did see that.
So, I hope they do some cool things with that. I did find a few issues with pacing that sort of, I think it kind of bumped the game off of my list with all the other great games this year. Like, I liked what it was doing, but it's funny actually, because my brother got it. I think Epic, the Epic Game Store recently.
Yeah, it was free on there.
gave it out free. So he picked it up, and he and I I mentioned we played Minecraft, so that's kind of totally in his wheelhouse. And he loved it, but he was getting into the end game, and he and I were talking, and some of his frustrations totally reflected mine in like managing resources and going between bases and like not having a map, and like if you don't look things up, like for the first 10 or so hours I didn't look anything up because I kind of didn't want to spoil the game, but then there are like one or two materials you just you might drive past them 10 times, or some blueprints or whatever you need, and it's kind of cool the way the game's set up its systems, but at the same time there are cases where I think they could have alleviated that a little bit. Like, and for me, that
very end game, like, okay, I want to get these last couple of objectives, but I just don't know in this huge ocean that I can freely explore because I have all the upgrades. Like, I just don't know where to look.
Yeah,
exactly.
They do a good job for, I would say, like the first 2/3 of the game at kind of like either via radio messages or other things, like kind of pointing you to where stuff can be found. But yeah, that back third of the game, not only is it like hard to find stuff, but it's also like you've made so much shit at that point. And if you're like me, your base is just hallways of lockers that you've put resources in. So you're like, oh, I need 4 gold ore to make this thing. This cabinet, no. This cabinet, no. Okay, there's one in this cabinet. All right, where's the other one? Like, there's a lot of that kind of stuff. And then, finding things at the end. I will admit, I did look up a couple things right at the end.
I did it as well.
Yeah, it's like finding a needle in a haystack. There's a lot. The world's big. Which part of me kind of appreciates that they're stuck to their guns on that, but it does make it very tedious. And like, I would not blame anyone for looking stuff up in that last stretch. It's quite a hurdle to get over.
Yeah, and I ended up dropping off at the very end because I had unlocked all the upgrades, and I guess the other thing, I think they, like you said, I was kind of wondering about it, and I think there are some things they could have done which wouldn't have hurt that much. Like my case in point is like, so I wanted to make a new base in like the Lost River, and so I loaded up my big ship, like stuffed all the lockers full, kind of did a rough estimate of all the materials I'd need. Like, get down there, start setting up foundations, got a perfect spot, and that's tons of fun. And then like I don't have enough copper to build like like a power plant or something like that. I'm like 1 copper short of finishing like some critical component that base needs. And so it's like, all right, well, let me just build some lockers, unload all my stuff, truck back up, which is like, it takes like 10-15 minutes to get from like the deep ocean to the, and and that would have been cool if it would have been like, okay, now you can, I don't know, maybe like transport, once you have all the final technology, maybe you can like use like a teleporter or something just to get materials between bases or something. Right. And you'd still use your vehicles to explore. Like, it's stuff like that by the end of it, it's like, well, I've enjoyed this game. I've seen everything except for the final story piece. I know where I need to go. It's just like, I don't really want to spend, another 20 minutes or hour or 2 hours, like having to kind of commute to finish out the last little bit.
Yeah, I definitely agree. There could be like some, especially in that back part, some quality of life things. I mean, even just a shared inventory, like everything,
speed upgrades or something.
Yeah, true. Or some way to like help. Maybe you could build something that would help locate something, or I don't know. But I still like, I mentioned up front, like this game, I had a lot of wow moments from it, and like and the game also had some bugs too. So like some progression stuff, some usability stuff, and some bugs. Like there are definitely some ways, like I can envision a version of this game that is even better. But I think I really had a good time with this game in the sense of like, it's a very like, I felt a real sense of like mystery and wonder of this world. And it's like in some ways it's like, oh, it's just the ocean. You're going to see ocean creatures. But I think the way they present the world and like the way you're scavenging for specific things, and then you just see some weird crate, because this is like an alien planet. You like see some weird creatures, or as we mentioned before, like you realize what stuff you're going to be able to build. Like, it was a game of constant surprises for me, and I enjoyed exploring that world a lot. And like that to me ended up being a really fascinating experience. And I think the way they stuck to their guns on some of that exploration, even though I absolutely do think there's a smoother way to make this game, it made it feel in a way like you crash land on this planet, you're not from this planet, you don't know this planet, and as a player you're coming to it new as well. But after I spent the 20, 30 whatever hours I spent with this game, I kind of felt like I had learned the planet and learned how to coexist on it and learned its ins and outs and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And like, so then I like felt like a part of the planet in my own way. And it was actually like an oddly bittersweet moment when I finally built that space shuttle and was ready to launch.
You were like, wait, maybe I should just stay here.
Yeah. It almost felt like home in a weird way, because I had so much time there poking around that, like, I remember climbing that ladder up to the cockpit of the shuttle and like just looking around at the ocean and like, oh man, I'm going to miss this place.
Yeah, it has a really good like culmination, because you build this rocket on a floating platform, and you do.
Which, by the way those things are constructed of like, all right, I'm gonna like collect these parts, and then we're just gonna materialize this giant floating platform for a rocket.
It's great.
You just hold your tool out, and it starts like,
let's 3D print this shuttle.
Yeah, out of your gun.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to derail you there.
No, you're fine. I was just gonna say that final like climb up to the rocket and getting like, they intentionally made it this very slow, lingering process that you have to kind of like go through and like be up above the world and see everything, and it is really good.
Yeah, that was one of the most affecting moments for me in any game I played this year, that final moment.
Definitely.
I found it to be pretty powerful.
But also I had all the good moments you're talking about, and then like similar frustrations with, or just some little quibbles, I guess, with the end game stuff, but also all the survival stuff and like hassle of finding that late game stuff led to like situations where I found myself like overreaching. And so I would be like,
this game could produce some good stories.
Yeah, at the bottom of the world, basically in the deepest caverns, and like my big sub runs out of power, and okay, how am I gonna handle this giant sub being out of power? Well, I'm gonna jump in my little sub, and I get out in that and like start swimming up to the surface, and it runs out of power.
Yeah.
And you're just like, okay.
But I like that it forces you to deal with those situations, because it makes for entertaining stories, and a lot of it's kind of on your own preparation.
Yeah, it was totally on me. Like, I could have prepared for that journey better. But anyway.
Yeah, it's I really appreciate that kind of stuff in this game too.
Yeah.
Like, you're really out there in the weeds. Like,
yeah, it really forces you
to hold on to.
Yeah, it forces you to act like a survival. As much as all the ridiculous technology you have is like very sci-fi and crazy, like you still have to act like a survivor, and you have to kind of rely on your instincts about like, okay, what am I going to need to do the thing I want to do?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've talked about some of our quibbles. I think it's a game of very high highs. There's some frustrations in there.
Sure.
But overall, I think I certainly had a really fun time with it.
Yeah, I really liked it.
I think others did as well.
Yeah.
But we are going to move on. That was Subnautica. And the next game we're going to talk about, number 7, as we have this list right now, is Hitman 2.
The second Hitman.
Only the second Hitman game ever made.
Is there a tiebreaker? Like, how did Hitman edge out Subnautica?
Yeah, we have some ties on this list.
I believe that's alphabetical.
I don't
I'm
know how.
okay. I'm
No,
okay
it's-
with
it's
Hitman
not.
edging out.
I think it was actually the order they popped up on this list. Maybe I don't know.
I'm totally teasing. It makes very little difference to me.
It's not important. But yes, technically, Hitman and Subnautica were tied for what that's worth.
Yeah.
But anyway, Hitman 2, the second Hitman game.
It's great.
Yeah, I think Nate. I played this and Will played this. I think Nate may have played more than any of us, though. If you want to kick us off talking about what got you so into it.
Well, I mean, it is like I think probably one thing you can say right away is it is more of the previous Hitman. But for my money, I think Hitman 2 not only just feels like a very minor evolution of that past game, but I feel like the level design in this game is just so above pretty much any other games that I can think of. Like, these maps are just so full of life and personality and wacky opportunities. I don't think I could pick a favorite level because
I can.
I just loved all of them so much. What is your favorite level, Will?
I think Mumbai.
Okay, yeah, Mumbai is really good.
I think that there's a lot of my favorite ways to take people out are in Mumbai.
It has some really good mission stories.
Yeah, the Bollywood guy. There's all kinds of fun you can have with him. There's the visiting sniper. There's the barber. You can play the barber.
Yes.
There's a lot of fun to be had in Mumbai.
Yeah, Mumbai is great. Did you have a favorite level, Justin?
Mumbai, I think for me it's a toss-up between Mumbai and forget what it's called, but the
suburbs, probably.
The suburbs level, yeah.
Yeah, Whittleton Creek, I think is what it's called.
Yeah, those two. Whittleton Creek I like just because, like, between the previous game and this one, like, there's really no other level like that. And
yes.
I like interacting with, like, people in the suburbs because it's not like almost every other level is like, it's either a city like Mumbai or Marrakesh from the previous game. Like, it's either crowded city streets or it's like some highfalutin, like, fancy party thing, like
right.
Like the racetrack level in this game or the Paris level in the previous game where there's a fashion show going on. Like, it's,
so you're trying to say there aren't usually people on the sidewalk selling cupcakes?
Exactly. Yeah.
Levels.
There's not as much of just like everyday. I mean, there is everyday people stuff in the cities, but like the suburbs just have a different feel to that. And
just
it's
like the lady who's just like running on the outer edge of the city the whole time.
Yeah.
She's just like out for a jog the whole She caught me doing crimes more than just about anything else in this game. This stupid jogger lady.
Yeah, it feels a little more slice of life, and then when you bring Hitman's level of comedy to that, I just thought it was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've talked about like cleaning up the molehills in a previous Atacs episode, and just goofy situations like that, and it's fun.
Yeah, it's so entertaining.
Yeah, and the game as a whole is just such a great comedy game.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And one of the best parts of that really is just how serious 47 and Diana are about everything.
Oh, yeah.
So, like, they just, like, what you're actually doing and then hearing them talk about it is just such a clash that it always kind of makes you chuckle.
Yeah. I feel like every character in the world takes it seriously, and like that's what makes the comedy work, is like everything's doing like it's a combination of like everyone's kind of serious about it. So like when you see security guards, they're like, oh no, you can't come in here. Like they're being very serious and uppity about it. But then like it's also all playing by these very gamey rules that you can abuse. And so like when that stuff collides, it's just hilarious of like, you've abused this gamey rule and but like the characters involved are still like acting on their routines and stuff. And then they get confused. So then you always have these lines of like right, if you throw something at someone and they notice that, they're just like, what the, and then just clonk in the head. So it's like, they recognize that something's gone sideways and you've caused something to go sideways, but it's always at the last moment. And they're always totally surprised. And then
Yeah.
you're either taking them out or they flip into like whatever reaction mode or whatever they go into. And it's just hilarious. And then,
Yeah.
in
Or
addition
they'll
to
just
that,
like way overreact to something that like doesn't really make sense. Like you'll just walk into a room and drop a crowbar and somebody's like, hey, you can't do that here.
Yeah, exactly. Like, because it's all rules and systems based.
Yeah.
And I love that they lean into that and they like the dialogue plays into that. It's so fun. And then the actual scenarios, like to go back to the molehill one, like blowing up the guy, that by putting explosives in molehill is like a semi-scripted scene. Mm-hmm. And I think even that scripted stuff is really funny. Like,
oh, you can goof it up. I mean, there was a time that I like waited too long because I thought the game was going to give me more of a prompt to blow it up. So he just walked away from it and then I blew it up and then he turned around and he was like, what was that? And I shot him.
Nice. I feel like even when stuff goes wrong, like when you mess stuff up or it goes off the rails, it's still hilarious.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the one kind of issue I had with it, I mean, one, like Nate said, it is extremely similar to the previous one. The other thing I think that kind of got to me is, and I guess I was more of always trying to get all the mission stories done. And so I would say about like, not half the time, but maybe a third of the time, I would be following one of the mission stories and I'd get to some point and it would be like, you need a wrench. And I'm like, oh. And so then I'll just wander around the level and, you know, a lot of times it'll kind of direct you to what you need, or maybe you would have just happened to pick something up. But there are times, like especially the level in Santa Fortuna where you're taking out the 3 drug cartel people. There was one that I needed a wrench to do, and I wandered around the whole level, like in it for like 20 minutes looking for a wrench. I was like, gosh, I could have like forged a new wrench in the time that I was looking for one. And so there were some of them like that I and that happened a little bit to me in the last game where I'd follow a mission story and I'd hit some sort of gate where I needed to stumble upon something. And it just kind of, whether or not you're able to complete that mission story. And that can also be a little tough because sometimes there's a timing issue with some of the stories. Like you need to do something at a certain time. And so if you're wandering around looking for a wrench and you miss the cue where you could have done whatever it was, so that sometimes is a little frustrating.
Yeah. And I felt that frustration sometimes too. And clearly the intent of this game is that you replay levels multiple times. And I think they assume if you're doing that, you're going to learn where the wrenches are and you'll learn the timings for things. And that's kind of a lot to ask for players in a way to invest that much. But I think that's how they want players to get the most out of it. And I can respect that of like, cause if you do truly learn those levels, like you probably just feel like such a badass mastermind assassin, like of just, you're bending everything to your will. In a way.
I mean, that's how I felt when I blew up the molehill when the guy wasn't standing there. You know, I felt like a god in man form, you know?
Yeah. And I think you did. I don't know if did you replay missions much, Will?
I replayed them enough to at least see all of the stories.
Gotcha.
So sometimes that took me a little bit longer than others, depending on how hard the stories were to execute. There were a few like amazing runs where I was able to get 3 stories done like in one run, but a lot of times it would just be me going for a specific story or something like that.
Yeah, I want to spend more time with this game because I just played each level once, and that would usually get me 1 or 2 stories. Sometimes I'd be like off looking for a wrench, like Will said, and I would stumble into some other opportunity. On the way, and I'm like, well, I'm going to do this now, and that was fun too. But yeah, for
merchant,
For me, I really like, this is one of the coolest sandboxes, I think, of recent years of just like, it really is your playground to be an assassin however you want to be it. And I think they strike a good balance of giving the story missions to give you something to follow if you don't want to be left to your own. Like if you don't want to just, if you want something to hold on to and not be totally freewheeling it out there. But I think there's also, they do such a good job at giving you room to experiment on your own and find things. And like those levels are really big and intricate and have a lot of opportunities in them. So like,
yeah, for sure. Like
a lot of room to play around. I think my biggest drawback is that it's very much just more Hitman, but there's still nothing else quite like it.
There is nothing else quite like it, and I do sincerely think that the maps in this one are just so much better even than the previous Hitman game.
I think I would agree with that.
On average.
Because you replayed each of them a lot, right?
Yeah. And I think it does work as a game that you can play through each level once the way you did and still have a good time with it.
Yeah.
Or,
I had like
or
I
do
played
the
each
thing
level.
I did and play them each like 5 or 6 times.
Yeah, like I played through them each once and moved on purely because of how much free time I had. But like I want to go back and play them more. Like I enjoyed what I've played a lot. And I genuinely want to go back and play more of them. It's not like, oh, I got my fill, I'm done. Like I would love to go back and play more. I don't know if I will for time reasons, but I would like to. I hope I do.
Yeah. I still have my copy in case they drop a DLC level or two. I'd be interested.
They probably will.
Yeah, I expect
I would guess. And they'll keep doing like elusive targets and live event type stuff.
Oh yeah, did everybody kill Sean Bean?
Oh, I killed Sean Bean.
I didn't. But has everyone done the sniper map?
I tried the sniper map. It wasn't my favorite thing.
I didn't.
I thought it was pretty funny. But
it is kind of funny.
Yeah. But,
either of you have any final thoughts on Hitman 2?
I think we covered it.
Yeah.
I think it's there's not many games. As I said, there's not much quite like it. It's a good time. Throwing blunt objects at people never gets old.
It never gets old. That's the thing that's weird about this game is doing those like really basic interactions just never stops being funny.
Yeah, it's all of those interactions just feel like they're smooth, like the way you interact with the world. It's a good video game.
It's a very good video game,
I'd say. Moving on from that, we have another tie, but we'll just go ahead and just keep it in the order of this list, which I don't know how the ties got ordered.
I think I literally think I ordered them alphabetically.
Okay. That makes sense.
That's what it looked like.
Yeah.
Because we had 3 pairs of ties. 9 and 10 were tied, 7 and 8 were tied, and the next 2 are tied. But we'll go ahead and first talk about the number 6 game on our list, which is God of War, which I believe all 4 of us have played.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it, I guess.
And we also have a good spread because 3 of us played the original games, and Ryan came to this one as his first God of War, so we kind of have multiple perspectives.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting too because I think it's on mine and Will's list, and maybe not on either of you Flex or Nate on
Correct.
either of your lists.
It's not on mine. It almost made it.
Yeah, it almost made mine as well. So
I wonder if this would be one of those like hotly contested.
Probably.
Well, I think it ended up in exactly the same spot on our list that it ended up on my list. So
there you go.
Nice.
Right there.
That's where it belongs, right, Will?
I had to pull it onto the list by sheer force of will. But I mean, I guess I don't know if that's because of a fresh perspective or what. Like, so funny thing is actually, and I think we talked about this on the regular podcast. So, God of War was the first game I played on my PS4 Pro.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's why.
I upgraded to my 55-inch OLED HDR
bling
plus.
bling.
It's that 4K HDR.
Did you go with performance mode or I don't actually know what they're called. Did you go for prettier graphics or more frames?
Prettier graphics.
Okay.
For God of War. it seemed to me like it was cinematic enough from the get-go.
Yeah, I think that's fair, honestly.
Yeah,
I'm an always
Monster Hunter
guy myself, but
performance.
Mhm.
God of War, cinematic. But yeah, I mean, for me, like, it's interesting because, like, I mean, for me, it's kind of a combination of, I guess, it's sort of a whole package in a way. I really like the story. So it was number 2 on my list. And for me, like, the things that God of War did a lot of things well. I like the story. I mean, the gameplay has some issues. Like, I won't argue against that, but I still thought it was, like, pretty fun overall. Like, there weren't many things about the gameplay that gave me a headache. Plus, I like some of the new mechanics in the gameplay, and I like Atreus, like the way you interacted and upgraded him, I thought was kind of a fresh mechanic. And, you know, the Leviathan axe obviously is kind of one of that game's claim to fame. And a lot of the combat challenges. So for me, you know, just, you know, it's incredibly polished. I think the story is really good. You know, I've just been a casual observer of the God of War franchise, and from what I could tell, like, the story of the first game kind of made sense, and I could kind of see, you know, how that would be a thing. But then, sort of like the Rambo movies, like First Blood Part 1 actually is sort of a heartfelt story about, like, you know, the poor treatment of Vietnam vets, and then Rambo 2 and 3 and 4 are all, like, just blowing everything up and spraying machine guns. So
yeah, that's probably not a bad comparison, having not really seen all those movies, but knowing something about them.
yeah.
The series goes off the rails.
Like, I think the first God of War has a pretty solid story, and the other two go completely off the rails.
Yeah.
And this game has a solid story as well. I think there are a couple, like, story turns that I look at and I'm like, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
But overall, I think, like, the core of what it's going for, I think, is really cool, and I really like the new thematic, like, resetting the franchise in the North setting. Oh, we should have said at the very beginning of this podcast that we are going to spoil any number of these games, potentially.
We already spoiled the endings of Subnautica, so
yeah.
You know.
I mean, we're not actively trying to spoil, it's just we may happen to mention spoilers.
Right.
But yeah, I really like that this is set in the Norse mythology setting, and like, it's a good reboot for not only the franchise but Kratos as a character as well, because he's got different priorities now, and he's clearly had time to think about what happened before, and, like, seeing how he deals with all that, and a lot of those narrative beats I really liked, and they've definitely set up some ways that this can go for, I guess they'll call it God of War 2. I don't know.
It is kind of funny too, because I guess the twist, like, I guess it seemed it was a bit maybe more of a twist for me, because, you know, I know Kratos kind of fought the Greek gods in those games, but in the previous games, but I'm not as familiar with those stories. I'm just kind of familiar from an outside perspective. So when I kind of saw the way they were going with making, like, a lot of the Norse, like, the heroic Norse gods into more, like, dirty, rotten, villainous, like, tyrants, it was kind of fun. Like, that was actually really clever.
Yeah. And that's a big theme for the franchise of the gods suck and are all bullies.
They all are terrible.
And that was true in the previous ones and has continued into this one. So I do have to ask, just quickly, as someone who didn't play the previous games, how did you take it when you were in Helheim and this giant face of Zeus appears in the sky and is like, Kratos, you suck?
I mean, the game kind of, I think, hints that Kratos is trying to cover up his past, and you know, I do remember seeing the cinematic trailer of God of War 3 where the Titans were storming Olympus, so I kind of put 2 and 2 together that, okay, you know, I think the game eventually spells it out, like, hey, I guess Zeus is Kratos' father.
Yeah.
I didn't know that going into it, but I got the sense that like, oh, Zeus is like really unhappy with Kratos, and you know, because they also say going into Helheim that you see things like about your past and about like the worst parts of you, and you know, knowing that he basically murdered the Greek pantheon, I was like, okay, well, this kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
That moment just cracked me up. It was so corny.
It was.
I think the thing that I think is really a big difference, as someone who I've played all the God of Wars I could have access to, is they are pure T power fantasies. Every one of them before this one. And so there were times where, you know, you're swinging these blades around super fast. You can grab these minotaurs and just like rip their heads in half. I mean, you can climb up on these like super powerful monsters and like rip their limbs off. And this one, you're a lot like you feel slower. You feel a little bit weaker, and you're also kind of vulnerable in a narrative sense, because it's sort of like you're trying to, you know, you're hoping that you're able to kind of teach your child to protect themselves and to fend for themselves, but you're not sure how successful you're going to be. And so there's two types of kind of vulnerability there. So it's very much I mean, as everyone's obviously said, it's very much a different Kratos. You know, it's a very like just a little bit. I mean, if this is your first one, then maybe you won't feel necessarily like you were weaker. But I certainly felt like a hit to my power when I was playing this one, and I had to take the encounters. I had to be much less button mashy, much more methodical. I had to choose my axe throws and when to pull them back, and how to upgrade, and when to use my runic attacks, and when to use Atreus. There's a lot more tactics in the combat than there used to be, at least in my opinion.
I don't know. The tactic of square, square, triangle is a pretty good tactic.
It was a great tactic, I will say.
Circa 2005.
I liked the environment a lot in this one, and I thought it kind of asked you to pay attention. You'd always find those little hanging buckets everywhere where you're like you need to pop up with your axe. The voice acting was really fantastic. I'm sorry, interrupt you. Go ahead, Flex.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, I don't want to make big points of these, but you did remind me of two things. One, I think the artistic, you were talking about the world. I think the artistic design across the board is just phenomenal in this game.
Yeah.
And then talking about the buckets, I really like, I'm sure we'll talk about the axe more because it's freaking rad, but I really like that the axe is not just a combat tool. It's also an interact with the environment tool.
Right. You can freeze certain gears and things like that to solve.
Yeah, so they make it a very central and versatile like core to the entire game, which I think is really smart.
I liked Mimir, your little talking head buddy. I thought the dwarves and their spat was pretty comical. I thought some of the side quests were super cool, like the dragons, actually releasing the dragons. I thought was pretty baller.
Oh yeah, I remember that one.
I think that my issues, and the reason why God of War didn't score a little higher, is there were a couple story beats that to me didn't quite really add up. They didn't quite really jive, I guess. And I thought that the game had a little bit of bloat. And this is kind of one of the games when I talk about like a game that just kind of throws in a little bit of everything. There's like a little roguelike mode, then there's like a little challenge mode, and then we've got collectibles, and there just seems to be a lot of different systems, and I don't know, I just felt like a lot of them were just kind of extraneous and whatever. They make it such a big deal to open up the different realms, and then it turns out that two of the realms are just like challenge rooms, and I was like, oh well, okay. And then I guess the other kind of piece there with that is that, and this is a personal peeve, I know, but whenever I run by something and it's like, you can't open this until you get the what. Yeah. And there was a lot of that in God of War, and I was like, oh no, and I gotta go.
It's like, what is this? A Zelda game?
Yeah, it's like, where was that thing? Where was that? Like, the little,
in some games, Nate and I talked about this on the spoiler cast, and some games I think do that well. I think this game does not, because it's like, you see a chest that's covered in brambles, and then when you get the blades where you can burn them, it's like you traverse across the world very slowly back to that point just to open the chest. It's not like the world reconnects on itself, so you naturally pass by that spot later and you're like, oh, I can open this now. It's like you have to make a dedicated trip to go back to it, and then it's like, oh, I got some money because I took 20 minutes to do that.
Right, because I went back and found the thing.
Yeah, which also becomes more of a pain, because this is one of my gripes about the game, is I think moving around that world is just very slow. And
it is.
Even sometimes in the main plot, it'll be like, all right, go back to the mountain for a third time, and then you have to traverse a realm, which takes a while to load, and then you have to sail across the lake, and then you have to climb the mountain again, and there's not much new along the way, and it's just all of the animations and everything just make it take a long time.
I think that the thing there is the relationship building piece, which, it's like your mileage may vary, but a lot of the dialogue between Kratos and Atreus kind of happens during those traversals.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of maybe what they were going for.
And that does apply in the main quest, but on the side quests, I don't think you get that. So
yeah, you might get Mimir saying something. I remember there was an article that was written about this game that mentioned how they liked the way that the stories were told. So it was like as soon as you pulled your boat up on the shore, they were like, let's finish the story later. And then they would
talk about this later.
And they actually would do it as soon as you went back out. They're like, all right.
Say?
Yeah, right, exactly. So that was
it's a neat trick.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think my other thing that I think the three big things that rub me the wrong way, we've already talked about two of them. One, I think there's a lot of bloat, as Will mentioned. And then two, I think just traversing the world takes forever. And I think there are also questionable story beats that we've mentioned. But I think the main, I don't know if you want to call it piece of bloat or whatever, that dragged it down for me is probably the main thing that got it to be off this list. Just the loot system I did not like at all. It felt totally unnecessary and kind of broken in ways, because just the way you can have a higher loot gear number but less strength, and you'll still deal more damage because of some contrived system they have, and it's just weird, and we shouldn't get into the details of that right now because that'll take too long. But I thought that was very poorly done.
Right. Yeah, and I don't know if the same everyone's. We've already kind of said that we were going to spoil a little bit, so maybe I'll spray this out there.
Go for it.
When Atreus first kind of learns that he is a god, and he begins to treat everyone around him differently, I kind of understood kind of what they were going for, but I just don't feel like they succeeded there. Like in terms of having him kind of wrestle with it, it just came off as, I don't know, it just seemed a little
it was
odd.
sudden. It was a very sudden character shift.
It was very sudden and very binary. He just went to mean Atreus for a little while and then flipped right back.
Yeah. And so I think that was the one beat that I was like, what? When I was playing. But otherwise.
Yeah. The idea was funny and cool, but they didn't execute it well.
And I think there's a handful of other story moments that I would put in a similar vein of just what? Really?
That was the only one that really got me. And I felt like they kind of recovered. When they were doing that, I was like, I get what they want to do, but man, they just kind of dropped it on the table.
Right. Yeah,
there wasn't really any foreshadowing or a character moment that really kind of caused that to happen. It's just I guess.
Yeah.
Because now he thinks he's powerful.
Asshole Atreus in the building.
I totally agree with the loot system. Obviously the loot system had its issues. I don't know. That was, if you describe it as bloat, maybe that and a little bit of the side content. I didn't feel like the game was super bloated, but I did enjoy the challenges. I did all the Valkyries. I did, I think, most of the Muspelheim challenges and the Niflheim. Is that right?
That sounds.
Yeah, I think it's your mileage may vary. It depends on how much you're kind of energized by that content. I went into it hoping it was going to be another realm in the way that some of the other realms that you go two
Yeah.
are. And then when I realized that it was just a challenge, it was kind of a disappointment to me. But I guess it just depends on how you're energized by that type of content.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely agree that from a story perspective, having two full realms just be kind of like side areas. As soon as you realize that from a gameplay perspective, like it's like, oh, it's like this is kind of a skinning over some challenge zones. The challenges themselves I ended up enjoying, but
Right.
there wasn't much else to see there.
Yeah, I think for me, I enjoyed the combat, but I didn't love it. So like whenever, like, I mean, because really a lot of this game is story dumps, travel somewhere, do combat. Like that's kind of the loop of this game. And I think for me, I liked the combat, but I didn't love it enough to do everything. And I still probably played 25-ish hours of this game because it's long, and I was not completionist about it. And I think, yeah. So when I loaded up like the Muspelheim challenges, and I'm like, oh, it's a lot of combat. I'm good. Thank you. I think that's where I set on a lot of that. But throwing that axe, it's rad.
Yeah. I guess I ended up enjoying it because it's like, okay, well, let me fiddle with my runes, and the objectives are different now. It might have been cool if they had worked some of that stuff actually into the main story, because like, you'd be doing a Muspelheim challenge, and it's like, well, you have to push these enemies instead of killing them, or like, you have to kill these enemies within a certain zone, so you have to kind of hold your more powerful attacks and like use your runes, and that's where some of those like side skills became more relevant.
Yeah, I can agree with that. And I think in general, I think I would have enjoyed the game more if it was more tightly paced and worked in more variety like that in the core of the game, because I feel like I fought the same enemies a lot over and over without any twists on it. And I think I got a little tired of it. So I think if they had done more creative stuff like that along the way, it would have set with me better.
Yeah, I could definitely.
Yeah, I did like the game overall, though, for sure. It does a lot of things pretty well. And if anyone else has some final thoughts, speak now, or we will move on. Okay,
We're good.
All right. Next up on our list, listed as number 5, tied with God of War, but gets spot high, is Frostpunk. A very cheery and happy game.
Yeah. The most optimistic game about humanity,
2018.
about the world.
It's like, do you guys remember Pyre? It's like, this is Pyre of 2018.
I don't know. Pyre was actually pretty positive, I thought.
Yeah. Pyre is kind of a weirdly positive game.
Just a downer.
That's what I was. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I get you. I see you. I feel like both of you played a lot more of this than I did. I just did the first of 3 scenarios. Was it 3?
Yeah, there were 3 at the start. I don't know if there are more now, but 3 at the start of.
They released a 4th.
Yeah,
for sure. The Fall of Winterhome, which I actually ended up. I played the first scenario, and then I took a break, and I went back and played the other 3 and replayed the first one on a harder difficulty.
Nice. So go ahead and tell us, why is this one of your favorite games of the year?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess it's one of those things like it's really well made, and I guess it sort of scratched maybe like a genre itch for me. Because I kind of sort of grew up on sim games. Like I played SimCity 2000, some of the Caesar games, and I mean, maybe it's just me, or maybe I'm misremembering, but when I was kind of reflecting on my game of the year, I was like, I can't think of that many like city builder / sim games in this sort of mold that have come around. I mean, I'm sure there are some, and there are some sort of tangentially related games, but so that's one thing, and I did play Banished. That's one of the closer games I can think about. And the thing I didn't like about Banished, besides some balance issues, is, we talked about structure and that Subnautica added to survival games. Well, with games like Roller Coaster Tycoon and Caesar, they sort of had, mission maps or a campaign or stuff like that. So you would have some goalposts and you could kind of go as far as you wanted. And one of the things I liked about Frostpunk, aside from the fact that it's just a pretty, solid city builder, is that everything is sort of balanced around these scenarios.
Yeah. So it builds these specific scenarios that are not super long, but like long enough that, for me at least, as I was really getting going, building my city and like figuring out what I wanted to do with it, and like getting things kind of figured out in a way that I felt like I could eventually survive. Once I got to that point, it was like, all right, so you've figured out this challenge. Now let's move on to a different thing.
Yeah, exactly. And along the way, like, they have a technology tree, and there are constraints on each scenario, and you kind of, maybe if you truly know 100% what you're doing at the beginning, you'll see all of the technology. I think in one of my runs, I kind of got to that point, but most of the runs, I was kind of having to make trade-offs, especially in the beginning of those scenarios. And even more so, the less you know about the game, you kind of have a few options and paths to explore.
Yeah.
So
you have options. I wouldn't say any of them are options that you should want to take.
Well, yeah, there are those options.
No, put those kids to work. It's great.
Even within like the technology, like you could use coal thumpers, which require more manpower, or you could try and invest in coal mines, which require steam cores.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like which research tree, and there are trade-offs in those areas as well. But then, they also add the Book of Laws, which is pretty thematic. And they kind of front load, I think, some of those choices, like some of the hard choices. But it's
in some ways they do. But if you get into like dire straits towards the back half of a scenario, then there are some real hard choices to make too.
Yeah. Like cannibalism.
Yeah. So the thing
that some of those didn't even have like that, from what I saw, like that big of penalties. Because I ended up taking a lot of, I forget what they were called, but a lot of the things that were kind of presented of like, oh, if you're pushed to the brink, you take this, it maybe help you get out of jam, but there will be more like, there will be consequences to doing this or something. And I often found those consequences not really that punishing with the ones I did.
So I think there is a discussion you could have about Frostpunk and its like mechanics and thematic divide. The thing I really liked about Frostpunk is how the thematic setting of it, which is, frozen wasteland after a global climate crisis. You're trying to keep a city of people alive around a giant furnace, which is like a big jet engine, basically.
Yeah.
And so most of the choices you have are presented as like, this is bad. This is a thematically bad thing that you could do for different reasons. Like you could put sawdust in your soup to make your people feel like they're less full, but it's not going to make them happy. You could put the children to work in the coal mines.
And I did.
You could enforce a police state and have patrols out in the streets, like basically pulling people out of their homes and taking their possessions and beating them. You can do all those things, and it tries to tell you thematically, yes, you probably shouldn't do these things, but I think you're right that mechanically it's not always like a trade-off.
And that's where the breakdown came for me, is I ended up taking a lot of those things and took them
because
early
you're a
on.
terrible person.
Yeah. But I mean, that goes without saying, but, like if you're really believing like the thematic implications of what's going on, then yes, I agree that they're interesting choices.
Yeah.
But I think the mechanics, I think there is that divide, as you mentioned, because if you're playing this as a game to win, it's ends up not being as tough of a choice.
Yeah, I think if you're playing it strictly as a simulation game, I'm going to make the city that has the best numbers, then it's not going to be particularly difficult.
Yeah. And I think it can be difficult. And I mean, I did enjoy my time with this game. I'm probably going to sound more negative than I actually feel. My biggest frustration, and this is the best way I can think of describe it, is similar to the frustration I had with their previous game, this War of Mine, which is that I feel like the game has very, very extreme positive feedback loops, which leads to snowballing. And positive feedback back loops are like, if you make a mistake, we're going to punish you. And if you do something good, we're going to reward you. And I feel like that leads to the game, like if you get off to a good start, it's going to get better. And if you get off to a bad start, it's going to get worse. And my experience of the game was I started the game once. I didn't know what I was doing. I poorly optimized things and got in a hole. And after about an hour and a half, it felt impossible to come back from. And I said, okay, I know what I'm doing now, but it's too hard to come back from. I mean, maybe I'd be able to scrape by, but it would be a chore. So then I restarted the game and made better choices early on, and the game was a breeze the whole way through.
Right.
And the back 6 hours were very dull of just going through the motions, and it was very clear I was never in any danger of losing. And that got a little boring in the back half of that.
Right.
So I do wish there was more of a mechanical connect with the thematic stuff, because I think the thematic stuff is really great, and I think the mechanics in there are interesting. It just needed that extra little bit to make it. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. It worked for me because I started my first game and I didn't do great, but I didn't feel like I couldn't do it.
Yeah, and maybe all this means is I should have played on hard or something. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I mean, whatever. That was the experience you had, and that's fine.
Right.
But for me, I had the experience of slowly figuring it out, not having optimal, but not a train wreck from the start. And then by the end, when these dozens or hundreds of refugees are pouring in and supplies are stretched to the brink and everybody's rioting in the streets, I have to be okay, do I push the button to do public floggings just to get people to calm down?
Yeah,
and I was invested in no, I'm going to be a good mayor. I'm going to lead my people to the promised land, and we're going to be happy about it, and we'll make it through together because we're all humans here. But I had to make those hard choices, and it really affected me in those playthroughs.
Yeah. And I guess, I mean, obviously I can see how that experience would happen. My experience with this War of Mine was kind of a big bummer because I played 10 hours and kind of futzed around and kind of figured out what I was supposed to be doing. And then I was oh, well, my people are all horribly depressed and I'm out of materials and this is the end of a playthrough. So, I mean, that could totally happen in a game like Frostpunk. But my experience was closer to Nate's. And then, the other scenarios, it's kind of interesting because they have different constraints that made me look at the technology and legal options differently. Plus playing on hard really did have some of those things that you're mentioning, yes, you can push the button and it's easy and, putting kids to work has no consequences. It's well, actually, when you get to those scenarios, and you're trying to keep people's hope up, people are a lot, I like the default difficulty. It's definitely a great warm up, but in some of those higher difficulties, I did find it's oh, well, I have to build a propaganda center because my people's hope is so low. And then you start using the propaganda to try and keep people's hope up. And then maybe it's there's a negative event where somebody dies, or, people start complaining and you have to build a prison. It doesn't snowball, but there's definitely some stuff that happens that it's wow, if I didn't have to use this thing. And if you're walking the tightrope and you're doing full child labor and a child dies and like it kills your people's hope, like that's actually a really bad thing in like a tougher difficulty. Like the normal difficulties don't punish you quite as much for stuff like that, but
Right.
it is more meaningful than I think, like, than it might seem in like a standard playthrough. It can definitely be a little bit more punishing when stuff like that happens.
Yeah, and that's good to hear. And I think it is possible that, as I mentioned, that playing on hard could have made my experience better, but it was what it was. And I absolutely appreciate a number of things about this game.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, I didn't want to seem more negative than I am on it.
Yeah, the look and the setting of it is so good.
Yeah.
It just completely drew me in right from the start.
Mm-hmm.
I think without that, I probably would not have cared as much about like making some of those choices. But it definitely got me invested in a way that I didn't expect.
Cool. We just talked about 6 good video games that we enjoyed this year. We are going to take a break, and we will return to talk about the remaining 4, plus read off our own personal top 10 list. So thanks for listening. Stay tuned, and we will be right back. Hello and welcome back. This is Atacs, our special Game of the Year 2018 podcast, if you want to call it that. We are back from a break, feeling refreshed, ready to go. I'm Flex, joined by Will, Nate, and Ryan. We have talked through 6 of our favorite games in the year, those being Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, Far Lone Sails, Subnautica, Hitman 2, God of War, and Frostpunk. We are going to talk about 4 more games to round out a list of our 10 of our favorites, scientifically assembled. And then we might talk about some of our personal favorites briefly. But
I
to
think
kick
we can
this
just
off,
skip over this next one and just talk about the top 3.
No,
I don't think anybody has strong feelings about this next one.
It's interesting. I was just noticing if I had chosen a different game for my number 10 slot, this would have moved down to number 7 or number 6. It's funny how stuff like that works out.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of us could say that about many of these games, Ryan.
Go ahead.
I could have done some things to
march
on above this list. But anyway, so the number 4 we have listed here is Into the Breach.
It's got robots.
It's got giant robots that punch bugs in the face.
Yeah, punch them into mountains.
It's like EDF, but good.
Shots fired.
Womp womp. No.
Will's probably like playing Meteor Fall or something.
But yeah, this is Into the Breach is my favorite game of the year by a large margin.
Yeah. So what makes it your favorite game of the year?
A whole lot of things. It will. So this is, I think, to me, this is a very elegant game. I think they've taken a lot of aspects of types of games I really like. Like, I would call this predominantly a puzzle game, but it's got elements of like turn-based tactical games. It is a run-based game, so it's got elements from other run-based games. Like it's kind of in a way like a lot of games nowadays. It kind of defies genre conventions, but like it takes a lot of elements of games I like, and I think it's really distilled it down to kind of like what works. Like it cuts the fat, it keeps only what it needs. And I think it's a game where everything has its place.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that I said it's primarily a puzzle game, and I think it does a really good job at just constantly presenting really interesting puzzles to think through. And I really enjoyed all year of like, all right, I've got my squad, the bugs have popped up this way. I see what, the other thing it does, I mean, I guess arguably the main thing it does differently from other like tactical games is, and what makes it more of a puzzle game is it presents like all the information every turn. Like when it's a turn and it's your turn to make decisions, you see all of the information that's relevant for that turn. Like it is all presented very cleanly, and the UI is very slick. Like for everything they present, like you could see a version of this game where the UI is bad and the presentation of it does not convey all that information well. But they really nailed that, and they kind of had to. And I think it's really, like, I've played this game a lot this year, and I still think like it just does a really good job at constantly presenting new interesting puzzles. Like it's in a way, if you want to like get reductive about it, it's almost like an infinite puzzle generator. But what makes it so great is I think those puzzles are extremely well designed. Like they're just really good freaking puzzles. And they're also just really interesting. And I think a lot of like the logic that you think through and like the situations that are presented, I think like, this is hard to describe quickly, but like just the way, like the types of interactions that are possible and the types of things you have to think through, I think I find very satisfying in the way that any puzzle or strategy game would be satisfying. Like I think it hits all of those kinds of notes very well for me. And like there's a lot of variety in it too. Like you're not just killing enemies. Like sometimes you're pushing them, sometimes you're shielding your stuff, sometimes there's a lot of different varieties of that kind of stuff, and that works out really well too. So it's just constant new scenarios to think through, and they like also present it in fun ways. Like I think it leads to like great moments and stories of like coming back from the brink and stopping the Vec threat. And like I think a lot of like I've had so many battles. Like I just a week or two ago I did a 4-island victory on hard with the hazardous mechs, and I had a battle where I looked at the board and I was like, there's no way out of this, and I ended up sacrificing one of my low-level pilots who had an ability. He got at his first level up, he got the grid defense bonus. Yeah. And I'm like, I don't really care if I lose this guy. So I used him to block a shot, and he died. And it was the last turn of the mission, and it got me through without taking any building hits or failing any objectives. And I'm like, all right, great. And,
nice.
He was good to go. And by completing all the objectives as part of my island bonus, I got a better pilot and put him in that mech and kept trucking. And it's like, I feel like this game constantly like leads to little stories like that, where it's like,
yeah, definitely.
You pull through a situation and made something work, and it's like
it's about somehow. To say, what kind of stories? You're a CO like sacrificing Pilot Johnson. I don't know if this is the kind of stuff we want to be at. It's like, look, kids.
The world's in dire straits, man. You do what you gotta do. Like he knew what he signed up for.
That's
but
really
like that's when you say it like that. Yeah. That's a viable option. Like it's not like the most common thing I do, but I have regularly.
Frostpunk was kind of dark.
Yeah, let's get real now. But like losing a pilot is a totally viable option, and like sometimes I make use of that, and like this game really gets you to consider everything, and I think what I really like about it is it makes everything feel important. And it's just a game that feels so pure and so elegant, where every single element in the game feels like it matters, feels like it's worth your consideration. And that to me is really satisfying. And then just the mechanics on display, it would take too long to like get into the nitty gritty, because I think a lot of this game is in the details.
It is.
But like, I just find those mechanics that it deals with very, very interesting and just constantly amusing and satisfying.
Well, they're interesting. Partially, you touched on it earlier. The thing that I like about the mechanics of this game, probably more than anything, is the variety in the basic actions you perform. Because one of the things that I usually look for when I'm playing a tactics game is like, okay, there is a like foundational rule set, and then your character's abilities should break the rules. And Into the Breach does that, but it almost goes a step further in that like every ability you get breaks the rules, right?
Yeah.
And
like you kind of, every squad is kind of its own rule set.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of what I was trying to voice, but couldn't find the words. Yeah, every squad is its own fundamental rule set, and then you upgrade it and get the upgrades that break its own rule set.
Yeah.
Which is just like levels of the thing I like about tactics games.
Yeah, it's like each squad is kind of like playing its own game in a way, and then as you upgrade it, and as you get those upgrades, it can kind of change the way you play.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's got good, like I've played this game, I think between the PC and Switch versions, probably close to 100 hours this year. And I still find new scenarios that I've never seen before, and like it just gets me to think about things differently.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a really neat game, and it is funny kind of coming off of Frostpunk's take on the end of the world and how bleak that is. And then like Into the Breach is also about an apocalypse, but it's like super cartoony and like sort of positive about it. Like you got these time traveling robot pilots who are like faced with the prospect of infinite timelines that are in danger, and they're just like, yep, I'm gonna jump to the next one. We got to save the next one.
Yep, you get to the end, and win or lose, they're like, oh well, we're about to die, so let's jump to another timeline and see how it goes there.
It's kind of endearing. I like it.
Yeah, I also like the little quips that come out of the buildings. It's like,
oh,
the flame behemoths are here, go get them.
Yeah.
That stuff's fun. I mean, honestly, I think a lot of the core, it is in little details, so it sounds like I'm being like very high level about this, but like I think just from a pure like mechanical design perspective, I think this game is just airtight. Like I think they had a clear vision they wanted for this game, and I think it's a very enticing vision, and I think they freaking nailed it.
Yeah.
Like it is supremely well made.
No,
and it's a lot of fun. Awesome. Great soundtrack too.
Yeah.
I listened to that soundtrack a lot of this year outside of the game. It's still good. Yeah, and it's like, and I mean, this is not a roguelike, but it is run based, and I think like this is probably the first run based game that I've gotten really into, because I think the way it does present, I really appreciate that it like from the start of the game with the starting weapons, as long as you upgrade those, and the upgrade cores are always available in the shop. Like you don't really have to, like sometimes it can help to get new weapons, but you don't have to rely on that stuff. And I really appreciate that.
It doesn't feel to me like what I think of when I think of a roguelike run-based game. Like it doesn't have that vibe to it, because it's not constantly about, like, the game is not trying to punish you and take things away and then like make you keep trying until you get the right lineup of things. Like every run is totally doable.
Yeah. And every run still feels different, so it kind of, I feel like, gets the perk of a run-based game of you're seeing different scenarios, and like we said, if you're playing with different mechs, like it can feel like you're getting different rule sets and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So it is one of those odd things of like this game just really like it appealed to my brain and like the types of puzzles it presented, and it's not a dry puzzle game either, as we alluded to. Like it's kind of fun. It's got a good, like oddly positive like vibe to it.
Yeah.
Does that kind of hit a lot of? I feel like I've been talking a lot. Does that kind of hit on the stuff you liked about it as well?
Yeah, definitely. I probably like it's not a game that was like specifically engineered for my brain the way it is for you, but like I can't really like knock into the breach for anything. I think it is a very well made package and does a lot of really cool things that are different from other tactics games.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting what you mentioned, because like I don't want to get into this argument, but like I think what it's trying to do, it executes pretty much perfectly.
Yeah.
And like I think that's not like that what it's trying to do is not necessarily going to be up everyone's alley, and that's totally fine, but like
right.
I think what it sets out to do, it pretty much nails.
Yeah.
And what it's trying to do is totally up my alley.
Yeah, and when I say it's not like perfectly engineered for me, that doesn't mean it's not on my list.
Yeah.
It's still a game I really love.
Yeah. I like it's number one on my list, but I've even more than that. And I was talking to Dave about this the other day. Like it's legit one of my favorite games ever.
Yeah,
which is very rare to happen nowadays, because I've been playing games for a long time.
Yeah,
but it's up there. It's one of the rare games. It's like I can just play this anytime. Like I've played this game almost 100 hours. I've enjoyed every minute of that, and I feel like I could pick it up and play it right now and have just as much fun as I've ever had playing it.
Yeah, I mean, you bought it twice, so
I did.
Yeah,
I'm happy to have it twice.
I'm not gonna lie. I would probably play a lot more of this game if I bought it again on Switch. I'm probably not going to do that, but I probably would play a lot more of it.
Yeah, I like controlling it with a mouse better, I think, but like having it on a portable, like this game's perfect for a portable system.
It really is, yeah.
Yeah, it's so good for that.
Cool, it's a great game.
It is a fantastic freaking game. If no one else has anything to say on that, we shall move on.
Let's do it.
To our number 3 game, regularly topping all of the industry critics' game of the year list. Bloodstained Curse of the Moon.
Yeah.
It made it up to a pretty nice position on our list, and I mean,
which our list is an oddly assembled thing in that stuff gets rewarded mainly just for being on multiple people's lists.
I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I'm okay with it. It's a good game.
Yeah, to a certain extent, that's true, but it was also kind of, well, I mean, I think it, but yeah, to a certain extent, it kind of like surprised me. It was like I was reviewing my list of games for this year, and I was like, yeah, I really liked Bloodstained. Like,
I didn't freaking game.
I went into that game kind of expecting, this will be like a kind of a retro action platformer. I'll probably play it and like it, and then move on. And I mean, that's sort of what happened. But it was like, thinking about top games, I was like, wow, that game felt pretty tight. Like,
yeah, similar thing happened to me. Like, I was going through making my list, and I just kept looking at Bloodstained, and I'm like, I enjoyed my time with this game. Like, it's a good game.
Mm-hmm.
It is definitely very Castlevania throwback. Like, it is doing that thing, but it's doing specifically like the NES era Castlevanias.
Yeah.
But it's doing it very well, and I think it's doing it very well for a modern context. Like, it's less punitive than those games were. Like, I think it controls better, and it has a few more interesting abilities. These are all subtle things, but I think they make it a more enjoyable game to play, especially in 2018. Because this game did inspire me to go back and play actual Castlevania 3, and that game is brutal. It's kind of a slog in a way. But this game is just really smooth. It's fun.
Yeah. It, to me, like, the thing that kind of stood out in my mind was it's kind of short in a sense, but it's short enough to be replayable. But I guess the level design, a combination of the level design, I guess, and like some of the character paths, I guess, give it a lot of variety. And that kind of speaks pretty highly to, I think, just like how smart the level design was. That, in your first playthrough, there's some stuff closed off to you. You have a few basic options, and the game kind of rolls out and unlocks for you. But then when if you maybe play it a little differently or go through it a second time, like you'll have access to play the game like in a much different way, and maybe like have characters that allow you to go in different directions. Or if you're playing through a level and you lose a character who has the ability to access something, like you may have to find yourself detouring to like a harder route. So it creates kind of these little sub challenges, and like it just ends up, and it can feel pretty varied, even within like a level or a playthrough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then there's even different like modes to play through, because you can play the normal way where you start with oh gosh, what is his name?
Zangetsu.
Zangetsu. I kept in my brain it was Zangief, but I knew that was not correct.
you play through Bloodstained as a giant.
You know what? I would play that game.
The red cyclone. Yeah, that's the good stuff.
So
you go suplex the moon.
I'm so sorry.
That'd be great. Alternatively, you could just call him Trevor.
Yes, you could play through as Trevor / Zangetsu and like pick up your companions along the way, and they all have different abilities and movement styles and weapons. Or you can
murder them.
Yeah, you can like just murder them as you find them, and then Zangetsu becomes stronger, and that's a completely different game.
Which is kind of funny because I did not realize you could do that, and I think the game's kind of tells you like, hey, you should press the up arrow on this person and talk to them.
Yeah, that's sort of the default that it kind of guides you to.
Which is like, I could totally see someone playing through this game once and not realizing the other playthrough styles are there, and
yeah, that would be kind of a bummer.
Yeah, because to me, when I first played through the game, I was like, oh, this is a fun, like it's a very polished, modern take on Castlevania 3, but it also is kind of just that game, and it's fairly short, and like it's kind of doing what that 30-year-old game did. So part of me was like, oh, it was fun, but it's not like I had a good time with it, but it's not like doing anything exceptional necessarily.
Yeah.
I think it was those alternate modes that, like, if it weren't for those alternate modes, I don't know that it would have made my list.
Right. Yeah. Honestly, it might not have even made mine if I had just had that first playthrough.
Yeah.
To go off of.
But like, you do that first playthrough, it unlocks Nightmare mode, where you go back through the game without Zangetsu.
Yeah.
And it increases the difficulty and adds a new final level to it. And
yeah, and that new final boss where you fight like possessed Zangetsu is like a really good boss fight.
Yeah, and I really like the boss fights overall. They weren't hard, but they were pretty creative.
Yeah.
And then you realize there's the mode where you kill everyone, and then there's also, which I didn't do this one, you can neither kill nor recruit anyone, and just play through a straight Zangetsu, which is probably harder.
Yeah, that
seems harder. I imagine that would be the hardest.
Yeah,
I don't think I did that one either, because it's like I could see it, but man, like base Zangetsu is a little UP.
Pretty limited.
Yeah, he's the least versatile of the four characters, I think. Like, his thing is just kind of, he has higher health. And then there's also a boss rush mode if you want to do that.
Boss mush.
Yeah. Getting tongue-tied. Which I didn't do that, but I think you did, right, Nate?
Yes, I did. I love the boss rush mode, but that's like totally my thing, so I can accept that.
Yeah. So it's just got like it's a short game and it's a simple game because it's based off a 30-year-old game, but like they do it well, and then they just give those alternate modes to play through. That just it gives it more legs, and there's a lot in there for what it was like a $10 game. Like
it's such a small package, but like I played through the campaign 3 times in the different ways we already talked about, and the boss rush. I'm saying it very slowly and purposefully, boss rush mode, and like I enjoyed every second of all of that.
Yeah, it's just a very well polished game, and I really like the art and the music.
Yeah, I guess that was the other thing I wanted to add is I don't know that we've, talking about Castlevania, it's kind of, I guess it's kind of implied, but those games have kind of a pretty cool atmosphere for, and they've tried, obviously they're trying to copy or imitate something, but it's still kind of neat, like, especially in the boss fights, whenever you're fighting these giant, like, monsters and things like that. They do some kind of
train engine.
Yeah. Or a giant evil moon-cursed train or whatever it is that like sprays fire out of its mouth.
Yeah.
It's coal.
Yeah.
Great. I love the bosses.
Yeah, the bosses are so good. Oh, man.
That kind of gothic style and like, the epic boss fights and stuff.
Yeah, and then the soundtrack got stuck in my head for a long time.
Oh yeah, the soundtrack is amazing. I'm actually like, as we're talking about it, it started playing in my head.
Mm-hmm. It's real good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just one of those games that like it's not really anything new or novel or whatever. It's just a really well done action platformer.
Yeah,
kind of in every part of its execution.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I think talking about Into the Breach and Bloodstained, they're both smaller games that like struck out to do something and did that something very, very, very well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. They are very focused and just very well done, like very polished, pure games in a way.
Yeah, it's awesome.
All right. Kind of a surprise placement for that one, but this is our list. It's a good. Moving right along to the number 2 on our list is Marvel's Spider-Man.
I'm glad we know who it is. I mean, who made it? Whose Spider-Man are we talking about here?
That's important.
I'll talk a minute about that.
Yeah, go for it.
I dig the way, and I think this is probably the thing that a lot of people have talked about, but just how much work I think they put into this traversal is
this game is money.
Yeah, it's the money, So you've got all kinds of great little zip to points and swings and momentum grabs and dives that you can do that just make going around kind of a blast. And the recreation of New York City is also pretty jamming. So you've got your Statue of Liberty and of course Avengers Tower that we all see in New York every time.
I mean,
I was about to point out the most iconic landmark, the Avengers Tower.
Right.
Every time I'm riding the train to work, like I just look at the Avengers Tower.
There it is. That Stark money. I think for me that was one thing I dug about it. I had a great time with this combat. I liked basically always looking for whatever I could grab and throw at people.
Yeah.
And the sensation of that is really, really satisfying. I dug the J. Jonah Jameson podcast that plays as you're jamming around. That he's sort of like an Alex Jones type of character. Probably in terms of the side stuff, the bases were my favorite. But I think the one thing that kind of edged this one out a little bit to me, like, because when I think about Spider-Man and God of War, Spider-Man was a lot, higher on my list. And I think part of it is just moving through the world and the combat being more fun to me in Spider-Man. The other thing is I just think this is a really brilliant portrayal of Spider-Man. I think the voice actor, to me, absolutely drills it. Like, he just nails this thing. So he's like the perfect combination to me of sort of, whimsical and kind of serious when he needs to be, and maybe a little bit awkward. And I guess when I think in my head about, what I imagine Spider-Man to be from the experiences I've had with, whatever comics I've read, this seems to encapsulate it really, really well, to the point, to the end of it, actually. And another friend of mine was kind of taken aback when I said that, but the final scene in this game sort of brought a tear to my eye. And I wasn't expecting that from a Marvel superhero game. So apparently, I guess it really got to me. The Aunt May, if we're gonna spoil, and do we have enough antidote or whatever? But I thought it was really good. Now, on the other hand, like, if we're gonna talk bloat, Spider-Man's got some bloat. And, it's got a kind of goofy skill tree. The gadgets, to me, were a little underwhelming. The suit powers, I thought like 3 out of like the 25 were particularly useful. The civilian stealth missions weren't really my favorite, but I think the combat, the traversal, and the story and voice acting, for me, were just stellar.
Yeah. Speaking to you're thinking of this as like a really great portrayal of Spider-Man. I definitely feel like this is in a lot of ways one of the best like big portrayals we've seen of the character and the city that he lives in, and all the other characters that are important in his life. And in some ways it feels like, to me, sort of on the level of what we got with Arkham Asylum games for Batman, especially.
I can see that.
One.
Yeah.
Like, it really is just taking that character and that world and all the other parts of that mythology that we know, and like doing it all very well and doing a great service.
Right.
It's interesting. Like, I agree with most of what you guys are saying, and this placed. I really like this game, and it was definitely on my list. But there were a couple things. You guys mentioned the story, and I mean, I do think the portrayal of Spider-Man overall was one of the better ones for sure. I really like the suits, and the photo mode I thought was kind of thematic.
The suits were jamming.
Those suits are amazing, and I do not ever care about like skin swaps in games, but I was swapping those suits around like nothing.
Yeah, the suit is the only suit that matters.
Well, and they put it in like all the cutscenes and everything too, which is just such a nice touch. And they let you use camera mode in all of those instances, which is also just because I like fiddling even in games like Horizon and God of War, which have a slightly more limited camera system. I've always enjoyed that, but and the quips, I think Will was mentioning, I really like that. But the story overall, like, I wouldn't say that it was necessarily bad, but it had its moments. I think, Will, you pointed out one of the better moments of the story, but it didn't always grab me as much.
So I think for me, and I don't know if this is the distinction here, like, I don't necessarily think like the overarching plot was like super engaging, but the character writing and the relationships between the characters and how they like talk to each other, like even just Peter's phone conversations with Aunt May and Mary Jane, like, were so endearing and like genuine, and
his relationship with Dr. Octavius, I felt was really, really fleshed out. And then also Miles Morales, the kid whose father was a police chief, or was rewarded or awarded or whatever. That was a really touching scene too.
Yeah, so I could see thinking like the overarching plot is not maybe like anything stand out, but I think those relationships are.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I do think some of the character moments were pretty great, but then with the villains, like a lot of times it just seemed to be bouncing between villains.
Right.
Plus you'd have to do like Mary Jane's stealth section, which Thank you, AAA game, for giving me a really mediocre game that I probably don't want to be playing right now.
Yeah, I mentioned that the civilian stealth was the low point.
Yeah.
And I do agree that like the overall plot I did not care about at all, but I think the moment to moment character interactions were very well executed. Like the writing, the voice acting, the delivery, the animations, like just the execution of those were good enough to get me to care about the characters, even if overarching plot and whatever, like it was fine. It wasn't bad. It was just very like stock standard, like plot.
It's a comic book story.
Yeah, exactly. Like I do appreciate that this was not, you know, like Arkham Asylum before it. Like this was not an origin story. Like both of those superhero games, including this one, are like they've been doing this job for a while. Like they're already pros. Like
he's a part of this city, and he matters, and people know who he is.
Exactly. Yeah, I really appreciated that as a starting off point.
Yeah,
I guess the other kind of nitpick, because overall I did like this game, but the other nitpick I had, and I was wanting to get your guys' opinion on this, is and to me, I think maybe it just exaggerated the feel of bloat a little bit. Like, to a certain extent, I feel like a lot of the core gameplay in some form has been done before. So even though Spider-Man has arguably the best implementation of like things like its combat and swinging and photo mode, like in some ways, you know, like when I played Arkham City, I would grapple and glide everywhere because that felt like the best way to traverse. And so, I mean, the swinging in Spider-Man was obviously better, but it was still this kind of like grapple and glide traversal that seemed pretty familiar. And then obviously it has like the Arkham style combat and, you know, some of those kind of core elements felt pretty similar to me.
Oh yeah.
So, I mean, the game overall, with all its polish and all its, you know, kind of unique stuff that it does, like you're talking about the character and setting, like it does feel unique enough. But at the same time, you know, when I was doing my millionth combat challenge or taking out, you know, and I do think actually the Spider-Man stealth was probably something kind of novel as well. I actually liked that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But at the same time, like I think they might have leaned in a little too hard. And
I spent a lot of time in the air in this one while I was in combat.
Yeah, even in combat, I did the same.
And I don't remember being in the air very much in the Arkham.
No, you can't really get in the air during combat.
And I remember doing
like the X dodge.
Batman gets on his hover boots.
I remember kind of doing a lot of, and there definitely was a little element of Arkham to it, but you know, kind of webbing people up and then kind of running in and beating them down. And I guess maybe I haven't played as many of them, but I guess I did play a lot of the Batman games recently. But
I think, like, to me, even more than comparing to the Batman games, like the biggest, I think I'm the only one here who doesn't have this game on his list. Like the biggest thing to me, and I think this is kind of what Ryan was saying as well, is this game does feel like a very standard open world game. Like it is pretty well done across the board for the most part, but it is and the swinging is kind of the one thing you can point to and be like, that's not in a lot of other games. But like, if you look past the swinging, like it is a very standard open world game, like modern open world game. You have combat challenges, you have your collectibles, you have the shoehorned in stealth missions, which for some reason are in a lot of open world games, and they're bad. Like it's a very like, and the structure of the game, like the way the story and side missions flow together, like all of that stuff, the upgrade trees, like every part of this game you can point to, and it's there. Like, this is what open world games do, and it's done well.
And I think the side stuff is definitely, I'm right there, you know, with you feeling that. I guess the only real counter argument is, would there ever be another way to do Spider-Man? Like, you know, the swinging through the city and stuff. Like, I mean, I guess you could make it kind of a linear kind of situation, but it does seem like a good fit.
Yeah, the city is important for sure. I mean, I would hope they could come up with more interesting side activities. I don't know.
Right.
Well, and it's a combination of like,
Or do they have to do Spider-Man?
Some things that work and some things that don't, right? Like chasing pigeons, not that exciting. Like finding backpacks on cool landmarks or taking pictures of cool landmarks, like that actually kind of fits both thematically and like in terms of getting around. But like, you know, and then the fact that the combat's great, but after like 50 million combat challenges, you're like, okay, I get it. I guess those are the things. Like, I don't think all of the side content is bad. I was kind of weighing this out as well, but I think they do stuff that doesn't work, and then the stuff that does work, they probably do way too much of. Just kind of my take of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do like the swinging's good, and I do think the execution on the story stuff is good. And like and the game also looks freaking fantastic. I think for me, I think a lot of this game is like, how much does it being a fairly standard open world game, like how does that sit with you? Because like I said, I think it does that stuff pretty well on average. For me, I got tired of the combat and the traversal, for as good as the swinging is and everything. But I think that's ultimately what drug the game down for me in the long run, even though I enjoyed it overall.
Right.
Because it is certainly a very well done version of that.
Mm-hmm.
And we are going to take a quick break to figure out some logistics real quick. And then we will be back to talk about our final game and our top 10s. Hello, we are back to this Atacs Game of the Year podcast. We had an emergency where our friend Nate had to leave, but that's okay. Everything will be all right. We are going to wrap this up without him. I am Flex, joined by Will and Ryan. We have one more game to talk about, and it is the only game that appeared on all four of our lists.
One of the, arguably, in my mind, one of the stronger titles of 2018.
It is the official Atacs Game of the Year.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
We can.
Arguably.
Yeah, there may be some debate around that, but for the purposes of this, sure, it is our number one game of the year.
It's a good chance it would be somewhere in the ballpark.
Yeah, it would probably be top, because I know it's your number one and my number two, so it's sitting pretty high. But that game is Monster Hunter World.
Yeah, and I guess, so I think, Will, you said this was a bit of a surprise for you. And I also am a little bit surprised, not completely, like this is one of those games I was wondering if you would enjoy it or not. So I don't know if you want to share your perspective.
Sure. Well, I guess a lot of times, sometimes I'm trying to figure out like the best way to say this, but I guess like the logic and organization sometimes of games that are really popular in Japan sometimes is hard for me to kind of wrap my mind around. So
I see you watching that anime.
You know it.
So when are you playing Dragon Quest XI again? Sorry, I don't mean to derail the conversation.
Okay, so I think, but the thing that I think kind of won me over eventually really was just these different unique monsters. I liked a lot of the monster designs that you're hunting. And I also, and of course, some of the strategies that were required to tackle some of them. I wrote down the elder dragons specifically typically require some sort of specific strategy, and then Diablos was my first real foray into a monster that required sort of a more specific approach. I also felt that although the game does a bad job of teaching it, the the moveset for the weapons, as a general rule, has a really good kind of tactile feel to it. So I enjoyed kind of doing the spread shots, dropping the rocks with the doing the dragon lance, or the dragon piercer. I created kind of an armor set that would sort of maximize my effectiveness when using that particular shot. So that's what brought me back.
I was going to say, all three of us on this podcast were bow users.
Yeah, we go.
So we all know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So, really, if there's one particular image that I can think of, it's probably, shooting, I think what's his name? Like the one that has the gold. Is that Kushala? What's his name?
Yeah.
Anyway. Yes. Dragon piercing a shot all the way up the back of Kushala Daora is probably one of the more satisfying moments I had in gaming this year.
Oh, Kulve Taraj.
That's him, Kulve Taraj. Yep. So now it's not all sunshine and rainbows.
Oh no, he's already bringing the hate. I knew I shouldn't have led with the.
You shouldn't. So here were
Lay it on
here
me.
were a couple.
It's not Japanese enough for Will.
Right. So one thing is the Gajalakas are a very important aspect of the game, who you are not given very much guidance at all with how to handle those.
Are you talking about the Palicos, or are you talking about the actual NPC?
The Gajalaka quests, I guess.
Okay.
The Palico tools.
Yeah.
The online matchmaking and waiting for the cutscene, I cannot let it go by without mentioning that.
I would have brought it up if you didn't.
True.
All right.
Fine. I'll let you have that.
The question mark quests, of which there are two, are a little bit long in the tooth, a little bit fangy, if you might say. And then the last thing is the importance.
Investigations is what
the
you're talking
importance of the power charm and armor charm, and how little guidance you are given in terms of what they are and how to make them and what they do. So I feel like there are a lot of great aspects of this game, but it's almost like they took it halfway with making the game accessible. And I'm sure that this one is so much more accessible than all the previous ones. But I feel like, and maybe it's just, when you have a whole team of developers that's been doing the same thing for so long and maybe making assumptions about their audience, I just feel like they could have pushed it just that much farther to try and make it so there's less research required, less kind of out of the game research to figure out what you're doing.
It's definitely better, and they've made a lot more quality of life improvements over the previous ones, but there's still a lot of room for improvement, like even in more than what you've mentioned, just like in little ways all across the game. Like there's just a lot of little moments where it's like, they could make this smoother, or this is kind of meaningless, maybe they should pull it out, because they're like, there's just a lot of stuff in this game that's still not that well explained.
But with all that being said, this was on my top 10 games of the year list, and I had a great time with it, especially with the two people that I have in the channel with me. One of them had a fantastic potion sharing build. The other one had a fantastic giant honking hunting horn. So I had a lot of fun with this game. So the fun quotient is pretty high. But that's what I'll say about Monster Hunter.
Yeah, it's got a great this was one of the ways I can put it is like, this was my social game for the year, because like it is really fun. Like the nightmare of actually getting a group together aside, like once you actually get in with hunts together, like it's really fun to just go on those hunts, and you can even have those support type builds that you alluded to. But even without that, just like fighting monsters together and like coordinating verbally, like, oh, they're doing this, like time to do this, like that kind of stuff works well, I think.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, I think the fights themselves, single or multiplayer, are just fun. Like I think I enjoy the mechanics of the fighting. I enjoy the intricacies of the weapons themselves, like learning that stuff and learning the monster patterns. And I enjoy the process. Like they make it feel like going on a hunt is like something you prepare for. And it's like, all right, I'm going to research this monster, like, look at the notes in my monster manual or whatever, and Like, I've fought it once before. I know it does this, so now I'm going to equip this and, make sure I have these potions with me or whatever. It's just like you do your prep work, you have a goal you set out, and the fights themselves are pretty epic.
Yeah, and it's like, here's the monster. All right, we've prepped. Oh, there's basil juice.
Then he dives in and destroys.
There you go.
That guy's a jerk.
Yeah. And then you kill them all, and you take their claws and make a new set of armor with it.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's pretty cathartic sometimes too. Like if you take down a monster that's been giving you problems, and then you make a new coat out of him, you really feel like you dominated it.
You take that, Nergigante.
Yeah.
And make a toothbrush axe now.
That's it.
Yeah, and I like you guys know me, I'm not a loot person. And I really appreciate, like, it can still get grindy, like trying to get stuff like gems is its own kind of nightmare.
Yeah, the decorations and stuff.
Yeah, and the decorations, like the flow of the base game, you had low rank, then high rank, and then if you wanted to go past high rank, it was a lot of looking for decorations, and I think that was one step too far for me. Right. But like the core of you make your new weapons and armor and upgrade them out of the parts from specific monsters. So like the Diablos weapons, you build and upgrade with Diablos parts, and that gives you a very targeted thing of like, all right, if I want to do this, I go kill Diablos. And usually it's very intuitive of like, oh, if I need a Diablos horn, I need to break its horn in the fight. So it's usually very intuitive like that. So I think it's a very targeted method of like getting parts. And it kind of, and the focus of the game is on going on hunts, and that's giving you reasons to go on those hunts. It's like kind of organizing what you go hunt. So I think that all works out really well, and it actually made me want to go like get those parts where normally in loot games I'm just like, I'll just use whatever I have.
Right.
So that's definitely fun.
I guess the only things I'll add on, because I pretty much agree with what you guys have said, is I also like the kind of the aesthetic. Not only like, I do like cosmetics in games, like, I like equipping a different thing will make you look different. And sometimes fiddling with that and doing like layers or transmogs, like I do like that kind of stuff. And I like the part of the aesthetic where it's like you craft a gear set out of a monster, and it kind of has like, visual elements from that monster. And, sometimes they have these big beefy suits of armor, and sometimes they have these more like sleek, like, suits of leather or whatever. But also just the game's aesthetic overall, like, you're kind of on this tropical island, like, and even though the story, as many ARPG stories go, is kind of silly, it's still just this like, it's still always this kind of like fun, campy, like, hey, this is like a new world. This is like, uncharted territory, and we're going to get out there and we're going to hunt monsters. And, the different environments all look pretty cool. You visit like a swamp and like a big coral, like above ground coral reef or whatever, like, and a giant forest. They have, kind of that fun aesthetic, both at the character level and at the environment level. And I guess the other thing I wanted to mention is that, I played off and on, for a while because, Flex and I kind of got it closer to launch, and then, Will and then we took a break, and then Will and some of our other friends kind of picked it up a little later, and so I played it off and on for a while, and it was cool to see all the content support.
Yeah, they did a really good job of adding stuff throughout the year.
Yeah, so they were patching things, making some small quality of life improvements, but then also, they gave players like a lot of layered armor. They've put in a lot of new monsters. They've added like, new challenge levels, and just it was always kind of cool to come back to the game like maybe a month later and be like, oh well, they've added a new monster and like an even harder version of this other monster. Like so it seemed like there were often between breaks there were often one or two new things to do. I don't always pick up a game after I've put it down, so it was kind of neat how much they supported that. And they have regular events, they have seasonal events. It seems like they just have a lot of community support in mind for this game, which is just kind of the icing on the cake. In addition to all the great stuff they've done with it. So I guess I get Monster Hunter now. It's a franchise. It's like, man, that's kind of neat. Like, it seems kind of niche popular. Like, I could see myself liking it, but man, it's probably a grind. It's
it's still a grind.
They've kind of streamlined it enough to make it, like, I guess where I can get it.
Yeah. And I think there's still some improvements, but yeah, I think they've hit a flashpoint. It's like the biggest stride they've made. It's really caught on over here. I think moving to consoles as well was a big thing because it had been on handhelds for a while. But yeah, it's one that I think all of us had a lot of fun with this year. And with that, I think that's going to wrap up the discussion of our 10 games. It was, I think, a pretty good year for games. And this list of 10 games was assembled from our individual lists. We basically just averaged them. So I wanted to give everyone a chance to read their individual lists, and if they wanted to make a few brief comments about some of the other games, they can feel free to. And we're gonna kick it off with Will, if you want to share your own personal top 10 list.
All right. Well, coming in at number 10 for me was a game called For the King, which is a co-op fantasy turn-based RPG roguelike, I guess.
Did you leave anything out there?
I don't think so.
Okay.
It's kind of on a hex grid.
Is it a Souls-like?
No. It's got a D&D inspired kind of stat system, and it's a good time. Number 9 was The Awesome Adventures of Captain Spirit, which is basically kind of a narrative adventure game in the Telltale sort of Life is Strange vein, actually made by the Life is Strange devs, about navigating life as a child of an alcoholic father, which is a real treat. Monster Hunter World came in at number 8. Number 7 was Overcooked 2, which is a co-op cooking game about dividing tasks to most efficiently create delicious dishes. 6 was God of War. 5 was Strange Brigade, which is a co-op third-person shooter about stopping the resurrection of a Wraith Queen.
Are you reading something?
I might be, because I wrote down, because I wanted to be efficient, guys.
All right.
Got multiple playable characters.
Power to you.
Number 4 is Marvel's Spider-Man. Number 3 is Door Kicker's Action Squad, which is a co-op side-scrolling real-time tactics game with an amazing soundtrack, I think. 2 is Sagebrush, which is basically a walking simulator about investigating the remains of a cult compound. And number 1, which was our number 9 or 10, depending on how you want to look at it, was Far Lone Sales. So
very nice.
That's the 10 for right now. Now, I am going to play more 2018 releases, and it could be that this gets flipped around a little bit. But
I mean, you haven't played Into the Breach yet, so
you dang right. Anyway,
cool. Very nice. Mr. Ryan, would you like to read your list?
Yeah, I would. And I guess I don't know about you, but I felt like, I don't know, it just seemed like 2018 had a ton of games. I know
it seemed like it had a ton of games.
No, it did.
Okay, yeah. No, we're in that age now where just a lot of games come out every year.
Yeah, and I mean, I know 2017. I like I played a good number of games, and there were still a few that I hadn't played. But sometimes when I look at the list of 2018 games I could try and pick up, it's a bit overwhelming.
Yeah. I agree with you that a lot of games came out this year, but I actually did a better job this year than I had the past couple years. Like, I think I've played everything I want to play from 2018. Like, I don't think there's anything outstanding. If I had enough free time, I would play Dragon Quest 11, but it's not as enough of a priority to dedicate 100 hours to that.
That's fair. Yeah.
And I think outside of that, I hit everything I wanted to play. But it was a lot of games.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I do try to keep it pared down, but it's like, I look up and it's like, oh, well, now there's Thronebreaker. Now there's The Messenger. Like,
yeah.
I kind of would like to try these games. So I may have to make some tough cuts or wait till those games.
Yeah. And I should clarify that there are games that I would try out given the time, but I think I hit the stuff I really wanted to play.
Yeah. Now that I think I'm pretty much in the same boat, aside from maybe some kind of a couple of late things that popped up.
Yeah.
Let's see here. All right. So my list. So I guess honorable mentions would be Subnautica and Celeste, probably in that order. If you were going 11 and 12, it's 11 Subnautica, 12 Celeste.
Yeah.
But then 10 is Into the Breach. 9 is Dead Cells, a game we didn't talk a lot about, and I don't think we didn't talk at all about, and I think
not
it's
today
on my list, which I thought was kind of interesting. It's just funny how a couple of games like that didn't quite make the cut.
Yeah, I think you were the only one with it on your list at number 9, so
yeah. Number 8 was Warhammer Vermintide 2, a game which I also played with Will. Number 7, Marvel's Spider-Man. Number 6, The Banner Saga 3. Number 5, Dragon Quest XI, Echoes of an Elusive Age. Number 4 was Bloodstain, Curse of the Moon. Number 3, Frostpunk. Number 2, God of War. And number 1, Monster Hunter World. So most of the games we talked about already.
Yeah. Probably probably the most noticeable ones are the two highest ones we didn't talk about. Dragon Quest XI, because I know that's a long game, so you spent a lot of time with that. And by all accounts, it looks very good.
Yeah.
And the Banner Saga 3, which is actually on my and Nate's list as well. It's just the way we averaged, it wasn't high enough on enough people's lists to make the 10 we talked about. But needless to say, multiple of us got enjoyment out of that game this year for sure.
Yeah.
And I thought it was an appropriate wrap up for that trilogy.
Yeah, for that one in particular, they did a good job of kind of not losing sight of their characters and like the moment to moment decisions, even as they kind of had to scale up the plot or, make the plot kind of more and more world shaking.
Yeah, I agree.
They balanced that pretty well, and they the gameplay is still, even though it may not be the best, they freshened it up enough to feel like they added enough new things for it to not feel stale or samey necessarily.
Yeah, I agree, and I think they stuck the landing and just stayed true to what that series had been tonally, which I appreciated.
I guess since you mentioned Dragon Quest, I guess that game it's kind of what you would expect in being it's a JRPG for JRPG fans, and it's really good at that part of it and the gameplay. But the part that was a pleasant surprise for me is the presentation and storytelling actually came across a little better than I would have expected. So
that's cool. That is definitely one that if I had the time, I would play it for sure.
So yeah. Anywho,
Nate, yeah, that is a good list. Nate has left us, but he has given me permission to read his list. So I will make up opinions for him and talk about them. I kid.
Super Smash, are you even going to mention it now?
Ooh, I can rearrange it.
Tell me what you think about Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, Proxy Nate.
It's okay. Yeah, and most of the games on his list we've already talked about. So his list, number 10, he has Monster Hunter World. Number 9, he has the Banner Saga 3. 8 is Subnautica. 7 is Into the Breach. 6 is Vampire, however you want to pronounce it. Number 5 is Frostpunk. Number 4 is Bloodstained Curse of the Moon. Number 3 is Marvel's Spider-Man. Number 2 is Hitman 2. And number 1 is Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. I think, Nate, now that I'm reading this, he might win the award for most games making our combined top 10.
Yeah.
I think just Banner Saga and Vampire are the only two that didn't.
Wow. Yeah, he must have gamed the system. I need to learn from him.
Learn his methods. Banner Saga we already talked a little bit about. I know Vampire, both him and Will played, and I know Nate, and because we talked about it, he really liked the world building and like how you participate in that narrative structure and everything. And I think he found it thematically pretty cool. But I won't speak any more for him because he's not here.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see because there actually are several games. You know, the Banner Saga obviously was on several of our lists, just a little too low to quite make it. But it is interesting to see, like, you know, Nate and Will played Vampire. Nate had it on. Will had it off. Will and I played Warhammer. I had it on. Will had it off. You know, we all played Dead Cells. Only I had it on. It's kind of interesting to see some of those games.
Yeah, it is interesting because you played Door Kickers with Will, right? And then he had it on. You had it off. So it's like some games go one way, some go the other.
Yeah. It is kind of curious to see a few of those omissions or entries didn't quite line up. Man, if we'd have had a debate this year, it could have been tough.
Yeah, it would have gotten tricky. For sure. I think it's pretty easy to see where the debate points would have been, but early some of them, or maybe you'd be surprised. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? I mean, I'm a little surprised not to see Celeste on many lists.
I think it was only on mine.
Yeah, it was kind of close for me. I thought it might be contentious in a debate, but
yeah, and I will say, Nate did tell me off air that his honorable mentions, his 11 and 12, I forget which order, but he said the 3 that nearly made it were God of War, Celeste, and Return of the Obra Dinn. I don't know what order he would have had those, but he said those 3 were all tough ones to cut.
Yeah. Speaking of, how about you read your list? Because
it has a couple of those.
Just mentioned. Oh, whoops.
As you butcher my list.
That was a misclick. I apologize.
Yeah, so my list, number 10, the Banner Saga 3. Number 9, Hitman 2. Number 8, Bloodstained Curse of the Moon. Number 7 is Dusk. Number 6 is Celeste. Number 5 is Tetris Effect. 4 is Return of the Obra Dinn. Number 3 is Subnautica. Number 2 is Monster Hunter World. And number 1 is Into the Breach. So yeah, I have a good chunk in the middle of that list that were all unique to my list. Dusk was a very late addition. That game came out in December.
Yeah, I haven't even heard of that game. So
yeah, I mean, it caught my eye because it came out and got very good reviews, but it is... So think of what Bloodstained is to Castlevania 3. Dusk is basically that to like original Quake or Doom. It's like a throwback to 90s era PC first-person shooters, but updated and executed very well in a modern context. So it like polishes over that stuff and pays tribute while making it work well. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Now I remember you making a couple comments about it while I was on vacation.
And I found it very entertaining. Yeah, I just played it this past week. Yeah, I had a lot of fun with that game. It's just similar to like a lot of my comments would be similar to Bloodstained, and they're right next to each other on this list. Is that it's just a game that I just enjoyed playing from start to finish, and it's just very well done version of that. And I think it's like more polished than those original games were in a way. Celeste, a lot of us played. It's a very well done platformer, and I really like the themes, like the narrative themes how they get woven into that. I really enjoyed that, and I kind of wanted to dig into more like some of the additional challenges, like going back and getting the strawberries or trying the B-sides, but just never got around to it. But I enjoyed the core game pretty well. Tetris Effect is really rad. It is that one. That's probably the biggest surprise for me on this list, because like I've never loved Tetris, but there's something about the way they have melded all the audio visual presentation into, like, they've tied it so closely to the act of playing Tetris that just makes it a really wonderful experience. Like I just really like playing that game, and it's really smartly done.
We were talking about games in 2018 that kind of, and that's not one that was on my core list, but it's one of those that's kind of come around, and it's like, well, if I found it for the right price, I would totally be on board with giving this game a shot to see what it's about. And I feel like there were kind of a lot of games like that popped up.
Yeah, I could see that for sure. And I could totally see people being like, $40 is too much to pay for Tetris. But for my money, it's the best Tetris has ever been. And I found it kind of profound in spots. It's really neat. And then the other one in that group, Return to the Obra Dinn, is just, that game is wild. It's the best description I've heard is it's a really giant detective Sudoku puzzle. Because you're on this boat trying to figure out how everyone died, and you're just cross-referencing all this information because you're just seeing the vignettes of how people, like the moments people died, and you're just like, oh, this person was here and that person was here, but they were also in this scene. So there's just like a lot of cross-referencing and like checking your assumptions and all that, and using all the information you can. And it's just really, really well done and really unique. Like there's nothing else quite like it. It's got a lot of style to it as well. But yeah, I thought it was a pretty good year for games. There's a lot of different kinds of games to go around, and we just talked about a good chunk of them.
Yep, I just noticed that the middle of your list, the top and bottom of your list, are all games that made it on our list, but the middle is all flex, 4 to 7.
Yep, 4 through 7 is a good chunk of unique games for me. Which you and Nate said Celeste were honorable mentions for yours, and Nate also said Obra Dinn was for him. So I know both of those games had some love as well.
Yeah.
But I think that might do it a wrap for this podcast.
New year, new format.
Yep. We'll see what the future holds for this. I enjoyed this format. And it served its purpose of letting us talk about the year in games and what we like playing. And I mean, there's only 2 of us left on this podcast because Will also had to run, but I think we can speak for everyone that we had fun playing games this year. Video games are good. I like video games. And with that, I think we'll call it a show. And thank you for listening. Hope you had a happy 2018, and see you in 2019. Thanks for listening. Take care.